Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I wasn't supposed to get anywhere near the base. Everyone knows Area 51 is off limits, like seriously off limits. But that year, during the little festival they hold in Rachel, Nevada, the one where the curious, the conspiracy nuts, and the tourists all swarm, I ended up sneaking a lot closer than I planned. My name's Garrett. I'm not a thrill seeker or anything. I just like to poke around old military sites and listen to the stories. That weekend, I drove out alone in my old pickup, my dog Jasper riding shotgun, mostly to get away from city noise. I knew the base was fenced off tight, but with the festival crowds and a few locals distracted, I thought maybe I could slip through the perimeter roads just to get a better look. The night I got close, the air was dry but cold, the kind of desert chill that creeps under your jacket. The sky was mostly clear, but a thin haze hung low over the horizon, softening the floodlights blinking on at the base. I parked near some scrub brush about half a mile from the fence and decided to walk the rest. Jasper followed, ears perked, tail low but not scared. The ground was dusty, and the silence felt heavier the closer I got. I didn't expect much, just some fences, maybe a couple of watchtowers, the usual guarded stuff. But as I rounded a small rise, I saw something that didn't fit. There, right on the tarmac under a cluster of floodlights, was this object. It was dark, so dark it almost swallowed the light around it, and incredibly smooth. No seams, no markings, nothing like any aircraft I've ever seen in documentaries or air shows. It sat low, almost flat against the ground, and had this weird shape, like a cross between a kite and a flattened disc. I tried to make sense of it, but it wasn't designed like a plane, a drone, or even a helicopter. There were no wings or propellers, no engines or exhaust, just this silent shape. My heart started to race, but I pulled out my phone to record it. I was careful not to move too fast or draw attention. There was nobody visible nearby, but the place was too quiet for comfort. The floodlights flickered softly above, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. I zoomed in, framing the object in the screen. Then, just like that, blink, and it was gone. No sound, no sparks, no flash. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. I dropped my phone in surprise and stepped back. Jasper growled low and stiffened, staring into the dark where the object had been. I looked around fast. No vehicles, no guards rushing out, no helicopters or searchlights. Just the empty tarmac, flooded by harsh, buzzing lights and an eerie stillness. I fumbled to get my phone back up, heart pounding in my chest, but when I hit the video playback later, everything was corrupted. The file was mostly static and glitchy, like someone had scrambled it. The only thing visible was a single frame, just one, frozen for a split second. In that frame was a faint silhouette. It wasn't clear enough to tell what it was, just a dark shape standing where the object had been. No sharp edges, no clear form, more like a shadow cast sideways, like something out of focus. I stared at that frame for a long time, tried to zoom in, brighten it, apply filters, but the image never got clearer. It was as if the footage was telling me to forget what I thought I saw, or maybe just reminding me how little I really know. The next day, I stayed away from the fence. Jasper wouldn't stop pacing, ears twitching at every sound, tail stiff like he sensed something I couldn't see. Around town, the festival went on, full of laughter and chatter, but out here, the desert seemed quieter, like it had swallowed the noise whole. That night, I slept in the cab of the truck, the radio tuned to static and occasional military chatter. I thought about going back, getting a better look, but something held me back. The whole time I felt watched. Not in a way that meant danger exactly, but like the desert and whatever lives here were waiting. I haven't told many people about what I saw. Most would laugh or call me crazy. But every time I look at that corrupted footage, that single blurred frame, I wonder how close I actually got to something no one's meant to see. And I wonder if it's still out there, just waiting. I clocked in at 11:45 p.m., just before the midnight lockdown started. I was manning perimeter tower 3, the one by the west fence overlooking Groom Lake's scrub edge. The moon was a slim sliver low on the horizon, and the air felt heavier than usual, dry but thick, like static waiting to snap. I ran through my checks. Fence lights on, motion sensors green, radio watch on channel 4. I leaned my chest against the railing and squinted through the binoculars at the empty desert. My dog, Orion, rode shotgun in the cab, ears perked and head swiveling, like he knew something was off. At midnight, the base's exterior floodlights clicked down, standard protocol, but this time the radio went dead too. Static beeped for a second, then nothing. I tapped the handset, twisted the volume knob. No comms. Normally, I'd hear chatter from the control shack, the shift supervisor, even the roving patrols. But that night, it was as if every radio had been muted. Orion whined low and thumped his tail once. I clicked my flashlight on high and swept its beam across the fence line. Nothing. I called out, "Base, this is Tower 3, come in." Silence, except the wind rattling the chain link. I grabbed my sidearm and pocket knife, clipped the radio mic to my vest, and slid down the tower ladder. Orion hopped down after me, paws skidding on the gravel. The emergency lights on the fence posts glowed red, marking the perimeter, but the floodlights across the compound were dark. A faint hum from distant generators was all I could hear. At the gate, I checked the keypad. No response. I tried the key card, turning it twice. Still locked. I radioed the tower again. Nothing. My voice echoed in the gloom. Orion paced, nose to the ground, then looked at me, head tilt. Behind us, somewhere inside the base, warning sirens wailed briefly, then fell silent like someone cut a wire. The gates across the other towers slammed shut, clank, 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 echoing. I felt the ground vibrate under my boots. I decided to walk alongside the fence, flashlight and Orion leading the way. My boots crunched on desert gravel, and every time I flicked the torch, the lens caught a glint off the razor wire up top. Orion's tail was stiff. He kept glancing at the darkness beyond the fence. After 10 minutes, I saw shapes. At first, I thought they were rocks or crashed equipment, but they didn't look right. A row of tall, white figures stood just outside the fence, 10 yards off. They were featureless. No clothing folds, no faces, no limbs in the usual places. Just smooth, white silhouettes, like mannequins cut from light. My heart thudded. I aimed the flashlight at them. The beam washed across their bodies, but instead of shadows, the light seemed to wrap around them, as if they absorbed the beam and glowed from inside. They didn't move, didn't blink, just stood in a perfect line facing the fence. I swallowed and knelt to pet Orion. He growled low, hackles up, then barked once. I stood and backed toward the gate, keeping my flashlight on the figures. My radio mic crackled to life, just static. I flicked it to another channel, same. I raised my voice. "Hey, who's there?" My own echo mocked me. The figures remained motionless. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rust or old batteries. I reached for the gate latch, but a cold breeze spun around, rattling the fence. The figures flickered 1, 2, 3 times, then wavered, like heat waves over asphalt. In the next instant, they dissolved into the desert haze, leaving only the fence and Orion's panting breath. I stood frozen for a moment, flashlight beam cutting an empty nothingness. The wind died. The sirens inside stayed silent. My radio was still dead. I clicked off the torch, letting my eyes adjust. Orion nudged my leg, whined soft. I climbed back into the tower cabin, slammed the door behind me, locked it. Orion jumped up on the seat and looked at me, eyes wide. I checked the radios again. No comms anywhere. The floodlights around the compound clicked back on, slow, deliberate, and the hum of the generators returned. I unhooked the mic and dialed the main line on my cell. No signal. I tried again. Vibration from inside, low battery warning. I clicked the phone off and stared out the window. Beyond the fence, the desert was empty. The rest of the night passed in disturbed dozes. I heard footsteps on the gravel outside the cabin door, Orion barking once, me scrambling for my flashlight, only to find no one there. The wind kicked up dust in little twisters. My radio spat static whenever I keyed it. At 5:45 a.m., the comm center texted every guard's handheld, lockdown lifted, resume normal operation. The floodlights dimmed to standard brightness. The gates unlocked with a distant thud. My radio crackled back to life with half-awake voices. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Orion jumped down and strength stretched. I climbed down the tower ladder, wind shaking the rails. The desert sun was starting to burn off the gloom. On the gravel below, I found no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to show where the figures had been. Even the dust was disturbed only by my own prints. I looked at the fence, searching for a sign, scratch marks, footprints, any evidence, but there was none. Back at the security office, my supervisor asked where I'd been. I said I was on patrol. He nodded, eyes tired, and handed me the daily log. "Nothing reported," he said. "We show no fence breaches, no sensor triggers." He tapped his pen on my report. Lockdown was precaution. Wired glitch, radio went out base-wide. I glanced at the hours log for Tower 3, radio malfunction, sensor reset, all marked operator error. No mention of figures, no mention of a strange chill. That day, I drove home on Route 375 beneath the bright blue sky. Orion rode shotgun, head out the window, tongue lolling. At the town of Rachel, I stopped for coffee and asked the clerk about the lockdown. He shrugged. "We just saw the lights go out," he said. "Never heard sirens." At home, I sat on the porch with Orion at my feet. The wind rustled scrub brush on the hill beyond our fence. I sipped coffee, staring at the ridge where I'd seen them. The sun warmed my neck and my hands finally stopped shaking. I didn't file a service report. I left the logs as they were and went back to my usual routine. But every evening when I clock in for my shift, I find myself glancing toward those floodlights, wondering if the figures will step out of the darkness again. White, featureless, standing silently as the world goes on around them. I was in the command center for the quarterly systems integration test. Just me, my buddy Raj on comms, and our dog, Shadow, curled up under my desk. It was about 9:15 p.m. and the rest of the base was quiet. Normally, during a systems run, you'd see the screens flicker as data streams in, some graph spiking, then steady back out. But that night, at exactly 9:18, everything on the main monitors changed. 1 second we had schematics and performance logs, the next it was rows of jagged symbols. They weren't letters or numbers, more like rune shapes stitched together, shifting slowly across the screen. I rubbed my eyes and leaned forward. Shadow stirred, gave a single low whine. Raj muttered through the headset, "You seeing this, Carlos?" I hit the keyboard to pull up our backup feed. Same symbols. Then came the melody. It started soft, behind the hum of the servers, like a music box half buried in static. My heart skipped. I twisted in my chair, listening. Shadow lifted his head, ears up, and cocked his head sideways. The tune was eerie, simple notes looping, ding, 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 fading into scratchy white noise. I reached for my headset mic. "Control, we have. An anomaly." The bass comms crackled. Nothing. The melody swelled and was gone in a blink. I tapped restart on the console. The screens went black for a heartbeat and then lit back up with our normal interface. Logs, graphs, data streams. Raj swore. What was that? I checked the clock, 9:19 p.m., but my gut told me we'd lost more time. I glanced at the system uptime log. The network had gone dark for exactly 47 seconds. No downtime entry, just a blank. The server room cameras blinked out, no footage for that period. Security feed from the hall showed just darkness, then lights flicking back on. We tried to pull the logs. Something was missing. 47 seconds of data, then a single line. 404, melody not found. I stared at the screen. Who programs an error message like that? Raj asked, voice low. Shadow jumped off his bed and patted around under the desk, sniffing at the cables like he expected something to be there. Reports started coming in. Lights in Hangar B had dimmed. The HVAC system vented cold air into the control rooms for a few seconds, then returned to normal. Crew on shift reported a ringing in their ears, like a tuning fork vibrating inside their skulls. I stood, stretched cramped muscles, and walked to the window overlooking Groom Lake. The dry lakebed was dark, empty, except for the distant silhouettes of hangars. No vehicles moved. It was quiet. Too quiet. Normally you'd hear a generator drone or a guard's ATV on patrol. I poked my head into the server room. The racks were humming steady. No alarms. The air smelled like warm circuit boards. I flipped the lights off, back on. Everything checked green. But the logs on the network switch still showed that 47-second gap with the strange entry. That night, I tried to sleep in my quarters, but Shadow insisted on staying by the door. I heard a soft tapping outside, like someone walking on gravel. I sat up, tap, tap, tap. I stood in my pajamas, flashlight in hand, and threw open the door, Corridor empty, lights normal, no footsteps. When I returned to bed, the bedside clock had advanced 10 minutes. I thought I'd misread it, but then the melody popped into my head. Ding, 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 ding. I shook it off and stared at the ceiling. Over the next few days, people joked about the bass symphony, but everyone avoided talking about it. Any official tickets logged it as power fluctuation or EM interference. But Raj and I both felt watched whenever we passed that server room door. And sometimes, late at night, I swore I heard that melody coming through my phone speaker, even though no app was open. On Friday, maintenance shut down the network to scrub systems. We worked by lantern light in the comms bay, reloading software and reconfiguring routers. Shadow lay by the power supply, ears flicking at each beep. We didn't see a single symbol again, and the logs filled in the 47-second hole with interpolated data, smooth graphs, no sudden dips. That evening, under a half moon, I took Shadow for a walk by the fence. The desert wind was warm, and the ground beneath the barbed wire still bore tire tracks from the test rigs earlier that week. I knelt to inspect scuff marks in the dirt, nothing unusual. I called Shadow back. As we turned for home, my radio crackled softly. The first beep of static, then the melody's opening note, ding. My pulse raced. I hit the power button, dead. My phone glowed to life on its own, screen showing error, melody not found. I dropped the radio and phone, shouting to Shadow. The sound cut off. The desert went silent. The phone screen went dark. I scooped up Shadow and jogged back to the gate. Inside the quarters, the lights flickered as I crossed the threshold. My phone lay on the table, locked, nothing on the display. I faced the wall and stared at the blank space, convinced I could still hear the faintest chime. Later, I found the official incident report archived under Network Anomaly. No mention of music, symbols, or missing time. Just a footnote. System restored 0312, 0 to 20 hours, cause undetermined. I took my dog home that night and left my phone in the car. When I went to bed, Shadow curled beside me, ears twitching. I lay still in the dark, listening for the hum of the bass, the whisper of servers, or the faint echo of those notes slipping through the walls. I clocked in at 11:45 p.m., just before the midnight lockdown started. I was manning Perimeter Tower 3, the one by the west fence overlooking Groom Lake's scrub edge. The moon was a slim sliver low on the horizon, and the air felt heavier than usual, dry but thick, like static waiting to snap. I ran through my checks. Fence lights on, motion sensors green, radio watch on channel 4. I leaned my chest against the railing and squinted through the binoculars at the empty desert. My dog, Orion, rode shotgun in the cab, ears perked and head swiveling, like he knew something was off. At midnight, the base's exterior floodlights clicked down, standard protocol, but this time the radio went dead too. Static beeped for a second, then nothing. I tapped the handset, twisted the volume knob. No comms. Normally, I'd hear chatter from the control shack, the shift supervisor, even the roving patrols. But that night, it was as if every radio had been muted. Orion whined low and thumped his tail once. I clicked my flashlight on high and swept its beam across the fence line. Nothing. I called out, "Base, this is Tower 3, come in." Silence, except the wind rattling the chain link. I grabbed my sidearm and pocket knife, clipped the radio mic to my vest, and slid down the tower ladder. Orion hopped down after me, paws skidding on the gravel. The emergency lights on the fence posts glowed red, marking the perimeter, but the floodlights across the compound were dark. A faint hum from distant generators was all I could hear. At the gate, I checked the keypad. No response. I tried the key card, turning it twice. Still locked. I radioed the tower again. Nothing. My voice echoed in the gloom. Orion paced, nose to the ground, then looked at me, head tilt. Behind us, somewhere inside the base, warning sirens wailed briefly, then fell silent like someone cut a wire. The gates across the other towers slammed shut, clank, 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 echoing. I felt the ground vibrate under my boots. I decided to walk alongside the fence, flashlight and Orion leading the way. My boots crunched on desert gravel, and every time I flicked the torch, the lens caught a glint off the razor wire up top. Orion's tail was stiff. He kept glancing at the darkness beyond the fence. After 10 minutes, I saw shapes. At first, I thought they were rocks or crashed equipment, but they didn't look right. A row of tall, white figures stood just outside the fence, 10 yards off. They were featureless, no clothing folds, no faces, no limbs in the usual places. Just smooth, white silhouettes like mannequins cut from light. My heart thudded. I aimed the flashlight at them. The beam washed across their bodies, but instead of shadows, the light seemed to wrap around them as if they absorbed the beam and glowed from inside. They didn't move, didn't blink, just stood in a perfect line facing the fence. I swallowed and knelt to pet Orion. He growled low, hackles up, then barked once. I stood and backed toward the gate, keeping my flashlight on the figures. My radio mic crackled to life, just static. I flicked it to another channel, same. I raised my voice. "Hey, who's there?" My own echo mocked me. The figures remained motionless. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rust or old batteries. I reached for the gate latch, but a cold breeze spun around, rattling the fence. The figures flickered 1, 2, 3 times, then wavered like heat waves over asphalt. In the next instant, they dissolved into the desert haze, leaving only the fence and Orion's panting breath. I stood frozen for a moment, flashlight beam cutting an empty nothingness. The wind died. The sirens inside stayed silent. My radio was still dead. I clicked off the torch, letting my eyes adjust. Orion nudged my leg, whine soft. I climbed back into the tower cabin, slammed the door behind me, locked it. Orion jumped up on the seat and looked at me, eyes wide. I checked the radios again. No comms anywhere. The floodlights around the compound clicked back on, slow, deliberate, and the hum of the generators returned. I unhooked the mic and dialed the main line on my cell. No signal. I tried again. Vibration from inside, low battery warning. I clicked the phone off and stared out the window. Beyond the fence, the desert was empty. The rest of the night passed in disturbed dozes. I heard footsteps on the gravel outside the cabin door, Orion barking once, me scrambling for my flashlight, only to find no one there. The wind kicked up dust in little twisters. My radio spat static whenever I keyed it. At 5:45 a.m., the comm center texted every guard's handheld, lockdown lifted, resume normal operation. The floodlights dimmed to standard brightness. The gates unlocked with a distant thud. My radio crackled back to life with half-awake voices. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Orion jumped down and strength stretched. I climbed down the tower ladder, wind shaking the rails. The desert sun was starting to burn off the gloom. On the gravel below, I found no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to show where the figures had been. Even the dust was disturbed only by my own prints. I looked at the fence, searching for a sign, scratch marks, footprints, any evidence, but there was none. Back at the security office, my supervisor asked where I'd been. I said I was on patrol. He nodded, eyes tired, and handed me the daily log. "Nothing reported," he said. "We show no fence breaches, no sensor triggers." He tapped his pen on my report. Lockdown was precaution. Wired glitch, radio went out base-wide. I glanced at the hours log for Tower 3, radio malfunction, sensor reset, all marked operator error. No mention of figures, no mention of a strange chill. That day, I drove home on Route 375 beneath the bright blue sky. Orion rode shotgun, head out the window, tongue lolling. At the town of Rachel, I stopped for coffee and asked the clerk about the lockdown. He shrugged. "We just saw the lights go out," he said. "Never heard sirens." At home, I sat on the porch with Orion at my feet. The wind rustled scrub brush on the hill beyond our fence. I sipped coffee, staring at the ridge where I'd seen them. The sun warmed my neck and my hands finally stopped shaking. I didn't file a service report. I left the logs as they were and went back to my usual routine. But every evening when I clock in for my shift, I find myself glancing toward those floodlights, wondering if the figures will step out of the darkness again. White, featureless, standing silently as the world goes on around them. I was 20 minutes into my night crosswind pattern when the first glitch happened. The gauges on my panel flickered. Altimeter, heading indicator, even the fuel flow meter went dark for a split second before snapping back like nothing happened. I was practicing touch and goes at the small strip outside Rachel, Nevada, the runway lights just a pale glow behind me. No storm in the area, the moon hidden behind a thin haze. I shrugged it off as a bad circuit, tensed my grip on the yoke, and lined up for another landing. By the third circuit, I noticed it, a shadow moving across the stars. just above the northern horizon. At first, I thought a cloud had drifted by, but the sky was clear. I banked left, trying to catch it out the side window. The shadow shifted too, sliding silently between constellations. Just a perfect black shape, like someone cut a piece out of the night. I leveled off at 3,000 feet and killed the landing lights. Inside the cockpit, everything went quiet. No radio traffic, no engine drone, just the hiss of airflow over the wings. The shadow hovered for a moment, and I saw its outline. A diamond, edges sharp and straight, surface utterly matte. It was backlit by starlight, blotting out every pinprick behind it. My heart thumped. I reached to switch on the infrared scanner on the dashboard, but the screen stayed pitch black. No heat signature. I cycled the switches. Dead. Same with the transponder and comms. Instruments in the dash went dark in succession, like someone reaching in and flipping them off one by one. I cut the engine to idle and drifted, watching. The diamond slipped upward, then tilted on its point and glided east. I followed, releasing the yoke and grabbing the throttles, but the tachometer spat static and the engine sputtered. The hum of the Lycoming was gone. No thrust, no prop noise. Just silence. My palms sweated on the throttle quadrant. I reopened the throttle, praying the engine would catch, but every instrument blinked off again. It felt like falling, suspended, and I realized I couldn't see the runway lights anymore. The glow of Rachel receded below, a dim smear on the desert floor. I took a deep breath, turned off automatic systems, and relied on raw feel, pushing the yoke forward to drop altitude, watching the wingtip against the starfield. After a minute that felt like 10, the engine roared back to life. The gauges snapped on, radio crackled, and the diamond was gone. I circled twice, scanning the sky, but only jet contrails in the Milky Way remained. The comms lit up with routine drone of a Cessna on approach. I checked my heading. I drifted too far east over barren scrub and dust roads. No sign of any restricted area lights or patrol vehicles. On the ground, I taxied back to the tie-down and killed the engine. My legs felt oddly heavy as I climbed out, headset crackling with static. Behind me, the desert was as silent and empty as ever. I climbed down the boarding steps and stood on the tarmac, looking out at the black sky. The strip's edge lights blinked, but no runway signals pointed toward that weird horizon. I locked up the plane and started walking back to the hangar. The wind was barely a whisper, but I heard a low thrum under my boots, like distant bass, or maybe just my heartbeat echoing. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing moved. My shadow stretched long and thin. Inside the hangar, the mechanics were wrapping up a late repair. I asked if they'd seen any weird power blips on the grid. They shrugged. No outages logged. The hangar lights were steady, the circuit breaker panel clean. I drove home that night across the empty highway, headlights slicing through the desert darkness. My phone buzzed once with a weather alert. Simple change in wind speed, nothing about electromagnetic interference. I parked in the yard, cut the engine, and sat for a moment, listening to the crickets. I glanced up through my windshield at the open sky. No diamond, no shadow, just stars. Inside, my girlfriend Mara waited with Milo, our border collie pit mix. He bounded to the door, tail wagging, muddy paws skidding across the tile. I knelt to scratch his ears. He looked at me like he knew something was off. Ears tilted, but didn't bark or whine. Mara handed me a glass of water. I sipped it, tasting dust and adrenaline. I didn't say much, just sat there, tracing the rim with my thumb. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes like a soft drum. Later, I checked the nav logs on my laptop. Every second of the flight was there. Altitude, heading, throttle, everything except a 5-second gap when all data froze. The timestamp on that gap matched exactly when I saw the diamond. I pulled the logs into a spreadsheet to look for anomalies. Nothing else. No extra signals, no radar pings, no transponder codes. It was like my instruments hiccuped and no one else saw a thing. That night, I dreamed I was flying again, instruments dead, chasing a shape through the stars. I woke before the dawn, Milo at my feet, nose nudging my hand. I didn't fly for 2 days. Instead, I buried my head in paperwork, ordered parts, checked oil samples, anything routine to feel normal. But every time I looked at the sky through the office window, I thought I saw a perfect black diamond slip between the stars. I'll have to log my next flight soon. I'll run the pre-flight checks, flip the switches, warm up the engine. Mara will wave goodbye, Milo will race next to the wheels, and I'll climb to the cockpit. And I'll wonder if this time my gauges will stay alive, if maybe I'll catch that thing again drifting smoothly in the night, blocking out everything I thought I knew. I was lying on my back in the scrub brush behind my house, camera mounted on a tripod, when the first flicker showed up. It was just past midnight, the desert quiet except for the tumbleweed rattling against the fence and my dog, Orion, snuffling at my side. I'd been taking long exposure shots of the Milky Way, something to pass the time out here near Rachel, Nevada. But when I glanced at the small LCD screen, there it was, a faint, dimly glowing sphere hovering above the northern mesa. At first, I thought it was a hot pixel or some lens flare. My shutter was wide open, 30 seconds, so moving lights sometimes streaked. I hit review again and zoomed in. The shape was a soft circle of pale green light, edges fuzzy. I flipped through the last dozen shots. Each showed the same orb, almost in the same spot, though I'd been framing different star clusters. I checked the camera's timestamp, 12:07, then 12:12:17. Every 5 minutes, the orb reappeared in nearly identical coordinates. Orion sat up, ears twitching, growling low. He'd never done that before. I stared at the sky where the orb should be. It was empty. No glow, no dot, nothing but stars. I sat up and petted Orion. "You see that, buddy?" He whined and nosed my hand. I unpacked my phone and switched to video mode, aiming it through the telescope lens adapter. I hit record and waited. About 2 minutes in, a flicker of green light pulsed through the eyepiece, right where the mesa rim met the sky. It stayed for a beat, then vanished. I checked my pulse. The little LED on my watch blinked 72 BPM. The sphere's second pulse matched it exactly. My chest tightened. I blinked, and the sphere was gone again. I sat back, heart thumping. Orion jumped up and scampered toward the fence, tail down. I followed the dog's line of sight. Nothing. The wind had picked up by cold air brushing across my arms. I pulled my jacket tighter, hit stop on the video, and packed up the gear. On the walk back to the house, Orion paused at the top of the driveway and sniffed the air. There was a faint hum, low in frequency, like a transformer about to die. The road beyond the last streetlight lay pitch black. I shone my flashlight. Beam cut through dust motes. I didn't see anything unusual, just desert brush and my own shadow. Inside, I reviewed the footage on my laptop. The recording started normally, stars streaking by with the Earth's rotation until 12:09:14 when the sphere flickered into view. The light pulsed, brightening on the exact frame when my heart's green LED blinked. I scrolled through. The pulsing never wavered, even when I jerked the scope slightly off target. It stayed fixed in screen center, heartbeat perfect. My phone buzzed. A storm alert for the mountains north of town. Nothing here. I glanced out the window. Orion lay curled on the rug, legs twitching as if chasing something in a dream. I tried to sleep but woke at 3 a.m. The hum was back, louder, like the ground was thrumming under the foundation. I slipped into my boots and tiptoed outside. The sky was overcast now, the Milky Way gone, but above the mesa a sickly green glow leaked through the clouds. I crept down the driveway, Orion at my heels, quiet and tense. The hum grew deeper, resonant. I stopped at the yard gate and watched. The glow faded out, then flared back for a moment before retreating again. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, like someone walking on the ridge, just out of sight. I called softly, "Who's there?" My voice came out thin. Orion growled, and I hurried back inside. The next morning, I checked my camera logs. The sphere had appeared 6 times between 12:07 and 1:02 a.m., each sighting exactly 5 minutes apart, light pulsing in perfect sync with my heart. My watch log confirmed my BPM had stayed between 70 and 70 and 75 throughout. The storm alert never materialized here. That afternoon, I drove to the old radio tower just over the hill. I wanted a higher vantage point. Orion rode shotgun, nose against the window. The road was rough, washes cutting across the dirt. At the tower, an empty shed offered a flat platform. I hauled my tripod up and set the camera to repeat exposures. Twilight edged in. Wind gusted stronger than forecast, rattling the tower's metal. Orion paced, hackles up. I glanced at the mesa, no glow yet. I remembered the 12:07 mark and stayed ready. At exactly 12:07 a.m., the shutter clicked, and in the eyepiece, the orb flickered to life. It hung in the sky, muted green, edges trembling. I panned the lens across the ridgeline. Nothing else moved. No passing plane, no blinking tower light. Just that sphere, breathing in sync with my chest. I reached to steady the tripod, but the head slipped. The camera jerked off target, capturing a sweep of dark sky. I refocused quickly. The orb was gone. A minute later, Orion barked twice, distant and sharp. I looked up. A shape crouched at the base of the tower's ladder, dark as the night, slender and still. My flashlight beam swung, but the figure retreated before the beam found it. Orion whined, backpedaling until I pulled him in close. I didn't wait another flicker. I packed up my gear in the wind, heart pounding so loud I thought neighbors would hear. On the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, saw the cliffs lit by my headlights until they vanished behind the hills. Back in the house, I sat in the dark watching the laptop. The files from the tower showed the sphere only in the first shot of the sequence, no subsequent flicker. I tried to stretch the videos. Nothing. Orion slept at my feet. I stared at the wall clock, 1:16 a.m. 30 seconds later, a cold gust rattled the window panes. My pulse spiked to 90 BPM. I pressed my hand to my chest. No light. I drifted off and dreamed of the orb flickering in my chest, pulses echoing across the desert. I woke to the hum again, full and low. The house seemed to lean with the vibration. I walked to the window. No glow above the mesa, just wind-tossed scrub and a sky turning gray with dawn. I poured coffee and watched Orion sniff the air, tail low. That night, I considered taking more photos. But every time I looked at the camera, I thought of the shape at the tower and the pulsing light. I checked the footage again, frame by frame, heartbeat by heartbeat, and realized how little I truly saw. I left the camera on the dining table, lens cap on, and headed to bed. Orion followed, nosing my shoe. Outside, the desert sighed under the wind. Somewhere up there, the sphere pulsed on, calm and distant, keeping its own rhythm. I rounded the bend in Mockingbird Canyon just after sunset and felt the dash lights flicker. My rig was an old Kenworth W900, no fancy electronics, but the speedo and tack dropped out for a heartbeat before coming back. I glanced at the canyon walls, reddish stone glowing in the last rays of daylight, and shrugged. Heat mirages do weird things to metal. I'd been running supply shifts out of Indian Springs for months. The route skirts Groom Lake, hugging the desert floor just under the restricted airspace. I kept old-fashioned paper maps in the dash and figured I didn't need glitchy electronics to guide me. I slowed the rig to 25, eased off the gas, but every gauge fluttered again. Even the clock ticked backward for a second. When I parked at the rest stop beyond the canyon, the engine died completely. Radio cut off, cab lights dimmed. I turned the key. Nothing. I climbed down to pop the hood, but the generator looked fine. Not a single loose wire. I tapped the alternator belt. It had tension. By the time I got back inside, the dash lights came on, engine roared, and radio crackled to life with an old blues track. Rhythm felt off like someone wiggled the speaker cone. I drove off without asking questions. Later that night, I was camped under a sky full of stars. The Milky Way bright overhead. My dog Scout, a lean black lab mix, lay his head on my boot while I cooked beans over the portable stove. The wind had died down, the desert was still. I swore I heard an engine humming low, but it wasn't mine. It was too deep and steady to be a road grader. I snapped the stove shut and peered into the dark. Rift echoes of the canyon wind still rattled my eardrums. I shone my flashlight across the scrub. Nothing moved. Scout licked his snout. I told him, "Probably nothing, bud." But neither of us looked away from the ridgeline. Around midnight, I crawled into the sleeper and dozed off, half listening to Scout's soft snore and the faint hum of the fridge. My dreams were tangled, rock faces shifting, gauges spinning, that deep hum pulsing in time with my heart. I woke to Scout whining. The cab was cold, ice crystals forming on the dash. Winter came early that night. Outside, the moon was low, casting pale light across the rest stop lot. I rubbed my eyes and hit the heater. The gauge flickered, needle dancing between L and H. I reached to touch it. My hand passed through a ripple in the glass, like the surface of a pond. Scout leaped down and padded to the window, pressing his muzzle against the glass. His tail wagged slowly. I leaned in. Beyond the ridge, under the blanket of stars, I saw it. A shape too straight, too flat to be rock. A dark, angular form, silent, perched at the canyon's edge. It was broad at the base, rising maybe 20 feet, tapering slightly at the top. No lights, but edges so crisp they cut into the starlight. I blinked. The shape stayed. Scout whined and backed away. I grabbed my coat and flashlight shaking in my hand as I unlatched the door. The air hit me like a gust from an open freezer, cold, electric. I clicked the torch on and swept it up the canyon wall. The beam died halfway, swallowed. No reflection, no shadow. I switched it off. The shape vanished. I stood there, heart pounding. The wind kicked up, rattling the trailer doors of nearby trucks. Scout nudged my leg, eyes wide. I yanked the cab door shut, locking us inside. The gauges calmed, the heater kicked in, radio spit static. I pressed the tuner, just static, no station. By dawn, the frost had melted and the sky was pale gray. I walked Scout around the lot, no sign of disturbance, no footprints in the dust beyond the pavement. The canyon rim looked like any other stretch of desert rock. I climbed back into the cab and punched in my route to Indian Springs. Everything worked perfectly. Gauge needles steady, radio tuned clear to traffic. Scout curled up on the bunk, and I eased the truck into gear. On the drive back, I stared at the canyon lights fading in my mirror. Fuel economy dropped. Engine idled rough as I passed the rim. I rolled down the window and heard it again. That hum, low and insistent. It pressed against the glass like a living thing. My heart thudded. I glanced up. The sky was empty. I parked at the depot, Scout hopped down, and I slapped the lock shut behind me. My dispatcher asked if everything was okay. I said yes, no problems. My voice sounded tired, too loud in the quiet office. When I got home, the living room was warm, the bed inviting. Scout circled twice, sank into his blanket. I dropped my keys on the table and checked my phone. No messages. I sat on the couch, stared at the dark window. The next morning, I drove that stretch again to see if the gauges would glitch a second time. They didn't. No hum, no deep cold. The canyon rim looked ordinary. The morning sun hit the rock, turning it orange. I withstood the urge to look for that dark shape. Back home, I tried reviewing the dash camera. The unit recorded fine, but the timestamps jumped backward for a few seconds around midnight, then jumped forward. The footage showed the canyon wall empty, no dark silhouette, just the lens glare, shifting wind, and me leaning toward the screen. I leaned back and scratched my head. Scout watched me, tail wagging. The sun streamed through the blinds. I told him maybe it was all in my head. He licked my hand, eyes half closed. At night, I found myself watching the window, waiting for frost on the sill, listening for that hum under the road. But the house stayed silent. The desert stayed still beyond the walls. Still, every time I start the rig, I glance at the gauges when I pass Mockingbird Canyon, half expecting the needles to tremble, and half afraid they will. I ran the small garage out on the outskirts of Rachel, Nevada for close to 20 years. You know, that little cluster of buildings that's really just a speck on the map in Area 51. Most of the folks who came through were locals or a few travelers passing by, but occasionally I'd get some weird jobs that made me second guess a lot of things. One thing I remember clearly is the number of vehicles that showed up with engines dead as a rock and panels all twisted or warped in ways that didn't make sense. I'd fix cars, trucks, even ATVs, and sometimes the metal looked like it had been bent by some huge invisible force. No dents, no scratches, just this strange rippling like the metal had been softened or stretched and then hardened again. I never saw anything like it in my life before those jobs. What really got me curious was how these vehicles ended up stranded. People told me their engines just cut out while driving along the highway near the restricted area. No warning, no sputtering, just dead silence. Some of them swore they saw weird lights in the sky right before it happened. I always thought those stories were exaggerations or someone's imagination running wild. But the cars, they were real, and the damage was real. One night, I was closing up shop around 10 p.m. The wind was strong that evening, the kind that makes the desert chill despite it being summer. I was locking the garage doors when I noticed something unusual out on the highway just past the ridge. There was this bright, rectangular shape, hovering maybe 50 feet above the ground, motionless in the air. not moving an inch despite the gusts. The shape didn't look like any aircraft I'd ever seen. No wings, no lights blinking, just a glowing rectangle that seemed too crisp to be a reflection or some weird cloud formation. I stood there for a minute, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. The wind howled around me, rattling the loose signs and making the night feel colder. I got in my pickup and slowly rolled down the road toward it just to get a better look. I had my windows down and could hear the wind whipping past. The light stayed perfectly still, no flicker, no shift in position. I hit the brakes and pulled over to the side of the road to stare. That's when the light vanished. Just gone. No sound, no flash, nothing left but the dark desert and the humming wind. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds. I checked my truck's gauges and everything was normal, no glitches or interference. I sat there, unsure if I dreamed the whole thing or if it was real. My dog, Roscoe, was in the cab with me, and he kept staring out the window, ears perked, growling softly at the empty highway. After that night, I kept thinking about those cars with the weird warping and dead engines. I started wondering if whatever that light was, it might have something to do with those strange breakdowns. None of the customers ever reported anything like that light or craft, just the car dying out of nowhere. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. It felt like one of those things you keep to yourself because people would either laugh or start asking questions you don't want to answer. I still live out here, working on cars and trucks, fixing what comes my way. But sometimes when the wind picks up and the night gets quiet, I find myself glancing toward the highway, wondering if I'll see that glowing rectangle again. I grew up in Rachel, Nevada. Yeah, that little dot on the map that everyone associates with Area 51. I never thought much about the whole alien stuff until it started happening right outside our back door. I lived there with my wife, Jenny, our kid Sam, and our dog Nellie, a German Shepherd mix who was usually calm but had this sixth sense about things. It was late spring, just after sunset. The desert was cool for once, the wind barely stirring the sagebrush. We were sitting on the porch when Nellie suddenly stiffened. She wasn't barking or whining, just frozen, staring up at the sky. At first, I thought she was watching a plane or a helicopter, but there was nothing obvious. Above the hills behind our house, where the desert just stretched out toward Groom Lake, a tight cluster of stars seemed to pulse. It wasn't like blinking or twinkling like stars normally do. It was more like a slow, rhythmic brightening and dimming, almost as if the whole group was breathing. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was some weird afterimage or my tired brain playing tricks. Jenny noticed it too. "That's not normal," she said, squinting. Sam just sat quietly, his face turned upward. Nellie's hackles raised. She growled low, a deep rumble that didn't sound like any dog I'd heard before. Usually, she was protective but friendly. This was different. She kept growling, pacing in tight circles on the porch, ears pinned back, eyes locked on that pulsing cluster. I tried to shrug it off, telling Jenny it was probably some kind of optical illusion or atmospheric thing. But I kept staring, and the movement of those stars wasn't subtle. They shifted position slowly, like they were moving closer together, then spreading out, but not in any way I'd ever seen from a plane or a satellite cluster. That night, I barely slept. Nellie stayed close, pacing at the foot of our bed, alert to sounds I couldn't hear. Early morning came with a heavy stillness in the air. The next few nights were worse. The cluster pulsed every evening, getting brighter. Nellie's behavior became more erratic. Sometimes she'd bark sharply at nothing, other times she'd just freeze and stare. Sam tried to convince us it was aliens, but we laughed it off, not wanting to scare him. Then, about a week later, it happened. I was in the kitchen around 11:30 p.m., getting a glass of water, when I caught a strange glow through the window facing the hills behind the house. Jenny and Sam were asleep upstairs. Nellie sat at the back door, ears perked, tail stiff. The glow grew brighter, an eerie, pale blue light that didn't flicker or move like a fire or a flashlight. It hovered just over the ridge, about a mile away, casting a faint light across the rocks and sparse desert scrub. I stepped outside, squinting into the dark. The glow was steady and low to the ground. Then I noticed the low hum, a vibration in the air that made my skin prickle and my teeth feel gritty. It was a sound, but not really noise, more like a pressure that settled into your bones. Nellie started barking violently, a sharp, urgent sound that woke Jenny and Sam. Jenny rushed down in her pajamas, and Sam followed, rubbing sleep from his eyes. We all stood on the porch watching. The light wasn't moving, but pulsed gently, matching the earlier cluster's rhythm. Suddenly, a dark shape took form just beyond the ridge, a smooth, rounded silhouette that seemed too big to be any animal or vehicle I'd seen in the desert. It had no visible lights or markings, just that pale glow reflecting off its surface. Nellie went ballistic, snarling and snapping at the air. We had to hold her back. Then, without warning, the shape slowly lifted off the ground, making no sound except that low hum, which grew louder as it rose. The craft didn't speed away or shoot up. It hovered, then moved silently across the ridge and disappeared behind a thicker line of hills. After it left, the desert fell eerily silent. Jenny commented on a strange, sharp scent, like ozone mixed with burnt rubber, that lingered in the air. I stepped closer to where the glow had been and noticed patches of scorched earth, the soil cracked and dry, as if something had baked it from underneath. We stayed outside for a long time after that, just listening. Nellie refused to calm down. She paced the yard for hours, staring at the hills, growling low, refusing to settle. The next morning, I went out with a flashlight and examined the scorched patch. It wasn't large, maybe 8 or 10 feet across, but it looked like something heavy had pressed against the earth and left a burn mark. No footprints or tire tracks nearby. That week, the pulsing cluster vanished. The strange low hum didn't come back. Nellie calmed down a little, but she still watched the hills as if waiting. We told a few people in town, mostly the locals who had stories about strange lights around the base, but no one said anything new. I keep thinking about that night. The way the light moved, the smell in the air, and Nellie's reaction. I'm sure of one thing. Whatever it wasn't something normal, and it wasn't here to visit. But it never came close enough to really see, and maybe that's why I'm still here, telling you this. I worked as a night janitor for a private contractor just outside of Area 51. Not officially part of the base, but close enough that most of what happened around there bled into my nights. My shift was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., mostly cleaning offices, break rooms, and maintenance halls. I never talked about what I heard or saw, mostly because nobody would believe me, and also because I wasn't sure what I was hearing. The first time I noticed something weird was about a month into the job. I was on my break, sitting by one of the big windows that looked out toward the restricted area. It was a clear night, cool but dry desert air, stars everywhere. The base itself was quiet, but there were always these weird flickering lights on the horizon, not like the usual security lights or vehicle headlights. They kind of blinked on and off in random patterns, sometimes faint, sometimes bright enough to cast strange shadows in my room. Around that time, I started messing with an old radio scanner someone left in the janitor's closet. It wasn't anything fancy, just something to pick up local frequencies and the contractor's channels. I figured it'd be a way to pass time. I'd listen to the usual chatter, maintenance teams, security patrols, but then sometimes something else would come through. Voices. Whispering voices. Not like anyone talking quietly, but low, sibilant murmurs that didn't sound like English or any language I recognized. I tried recording it on my phone a few times, but the files would glitch or corrupt. The voices would only come through in static bursts on the scanner, fading in and out. Every time I tuned the dial, the whispers would vanish. I told myself it was some kind of interference or prank signals from nearby towns, but it didn't sound like static. It almost felt intentional. The nights stretched on, and the voices kept coming at irregular intervals. I kept track, thinking maybe there was a pattern, but there wasn't. The whispers weren't just random noise. Sometimes, if I tuned just right, I could swear I heard a few distinct words or phrases, though they were so garbled and alien that I couldn't piece together anything. On a couple of nights, I heard footsteps outside my window, not from the usual patrols, which had predictable routes and sounds. These footsteps were soft, deliberate, paced slow. I'd look out, but no one was there, just the desert and the distant fence lines. One night, around 2 a.m., I caught movement in the corner of my eye. A faint glow moved along the base perimeter fence. It was like a small light, shifting silently, floating just a few feet above the ground. When I turned to look straight at it, it disappeared like it was never there. That started to happen more often, lights flickering through the brush, small orbs that vanished if I tried to track them. I wasn't afraid exactly, more like unsettled, like something was watching me, and the feeling was mutual. I kept catching glimpses of shadows near the fence. Nothing solid, just shapes that didn't look like people or animals. Once, I thought I saw something crouching low near a fence post, but it melted into the desert night when I blinked. The whispering voices sometimes changed tone. One night, it was almost like a chant, a rhythm. I remember gripping the radio tightly, sweating, trying to make sense of it. The voices never got louder or clearer, just a haunting, distant murmur, always fading before I could focus. Another time, my dog, her name's Tilly, started growling at the window, staring at the fence line. She never did that before. She wouldn't stop, even when I tried to calm her. The light near the fence flickered again, faint but definite. Tilly's fur bristled, and she backed away slowly. After that, I began locking my door even though it wasn't required. I double-checked windows, kept the blinds drawn. It felt like whatever was out there wanted me to see it, but didn't want me to look too closely. Once I caught a reflection in the glass, something behind me when I was alone. No one else in the room. I spun around, nothing there. I thought about quitting, but I needed the money. The shifts were quiet except for the noises I couldn't explain. One night, the voices got louder, almost like they were right beside me in the room. The scanner crackled and then cut out completely. I went to check the breaker box in the hall, and as soon as I opened the panel, the air turned ice cold. I swear I saw a thin shadow slip past the far door frame. I closed the panel fast and left the building. Outside, the desert was calm. Tilly was pacing nervously. That night, the fence lights went completely dark for about 5 minutes. No security announcements. When the power came back, the lights flickered strangely for a few seconds, then returned to normal. I finally handed in my resignation after that. Before I left, I packed up the radio scanner and the recordings I could salvage. Most of the files were corrupted or blank. Only a few had fragments of that whispering. I'm home now, miles away from that desert and those shadows. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear faint murmurs in the background, like a radio picking up static on an empty frequency. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, Tilly stares out the window, ears twitching as if waiting for something to come back. I worked at Area 51 for about 5 years as a tech. Nothing glamorous, just maintenance on some of the older systems they kept running underground. I never had clearance for anything labeled project or special, but even the routine stuff was weird enough to make you question what you were part of. Most nights, I was alone in the maintenance tunnels or in these big control rooms where the walls vibrated faintly, like the whole place was humming quietly under the desert floor. That humming was the first thing that stuck with me. It wasn't a mechanical noise you could pinpoint, no fan, no motor you could isolate. It was this low, steady vibration that ran through your bones. At first, I thought it was just the air conditioning or something normal. But after a while, you noticed it changed. Sometimes it would swell up like the whole compound was breathing. Other times it would pulse in weird rhythms, almost like it was alive. I remember one night in particular, I just finished a check on one of the server banks deep in the West Wing. The place was pitch dark except for the emergency lights casting a red glow. I was alone, except for my dog, Hobo, a scrappy mutt I smuggled in with me. Hobo hated the tunnels. His fur would bristle and he'd whine like he could sense something was off. That night, he was extra twitchy. I was on my way back when the humming shifted. It got louder, more insistent, almost like a call. Hobo stopped dead in his tracks and stared down a corridor I hadn't noticed before. It was normally sealed off, an older section marked restricted, no entry. The door was cracked open just a little. I swear I saw a faint blue glow leaking out. I wasn't supposed to go down there, but curiosity got the better of me. I edged closer, flashlight in hand, but Hobo growled low and tugged on his leash. I gave him a squeeze to calm him down, but my gut told me to turn around. Before I could decide, the humming changed again. It was like the sound hit a new frequency, deeper and almost musical, but totally unlike anything I'd heard before. It vibrated in the air around us. Then the blue light inside the room flickered and vanished, leaving nothing but the dark corridor. I tried the door, but it was locked tight. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the screen went black. Dead. The weirdest part was Hobo suddenly sprinted back the way we came, dragging me along. His barking echoed through the tunnels until we burst into the main hallway, where the hum faded into silence. I told my supervisor about the light in the door, but he just laughed it off. "Old wiring," he said, "or some maintenance crew left the lights on by accident." But it didn't feel like that at all. The next morning, I checked the security camera footage from that wing. I wasn't supposed to have access, but I knew the system well enough to pull up some older recordings. At first, nothing looked out of place. Just the usual dark hallways, empty rooms, the blinking consoles. Then I noticed something strange around 3:13 a.m. The camera outside that restricted door showed a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves above asphalt on a hot day. It grew stronger until, slowly, a shape appeared. It was a craft, or at least something shaped like one. No lights or markings, just a smooth, dark object hovering silently a few feet off the ground. The shape kept shifting, like looking at a mirage or a reflection in water. One moment it was oval, the next more angular, edges blurring and reforming like smoke caught in a breeze. The weirdest part was that it made no sound at all. Not a hum, not a drone, nothing. Just silence. It stayed there for about 4 minutes, then dissolved like it was never there. I showed the footage to a few coworkers quietly, but nobody would talk about it openly. Management claimed it was some new prototype drone or a security system test, but no one could explain the shimmer or how it disappeared. A week later, the humming started again, louder this time, vibrating through the walls like it wanted to shake the whole building apart. That night, the cameras caught the same shimmering shape outside again. Only this time it seemed to be looking directly at the cameras, or maybe beyond them, like it was watching us. I tried to report it up the chain, but my superiors brushed it off as classified experimental tech, the kind of thing I wasn't cleared to understand. They told me to forget about it and focus on my maintenance work, but I couldn't. The feeling I got wasn't from some machine. It was like something was alive down there, watching, waiting. Sometimes when the humming came on, I'd find Hobo sitting quietly at the tunnel entrances, staring out into the darkness like he saw something moving just beyond the lights. I caught myself doing the same, feeling like I was being watched too. I left the base a year ago. They didn't fire me or anything. I just got tired of the silence and the secrets. But I still hear that humming sometimes in my dreams. And sometimes when I look up at the night sky from my backyard in Nevada, I swear I see that same shimmering shape drifting just beyond the stars. No one talks about what's really down there, but I know it's not just machines. Whatever it is, it's been there longer than any of us, and I don't think it ever stopped watching. I worked at Area 51 for about 3 years, mostly in one of the labs tucked far away from the main gates and hangars. My official title was Project Engineer, but what that actually meant was I helped with some of the reverse engineering they did on things nobody outside the base was supposed to see or talk about. I left the job last year and I still can't figure out everything I saw, which is why I'm writing this now. The place is nothing like you see in movies. No alien autopsies or flying saucers sitting out in the open. Mostly it's just super high-tech military stuff that looks like it belongs in a sci-fi movie, but it's real. The weirdest part wasn't the tech itself, but how some of it didn't behave like any machine we'd ever encountered. There were tests we ran on devices, vehicles mostly, that supposedly had the ability to phase through solid objects. Sounds nuts, but it's what I saw. We'd put a prototype in a sealed chamber, usually one of those large metal boxes with thick walls, designed to hold the machines during testing. The idea was to check if the vehicle could actually move through barriers without damage or loss of function. At first, it was controlled experiments. We'd watch through reinforced glass or cameras, see the vehicle start on one side of the chamber, then, sometimes, it would just disappear from one spot and show up on the other side, like it phased through the wall. No noise, no vibrations, nothing. Not every test worked like that. Some failed or just glitched, but a few times the vehicle would vanish from the chamber entirely, not just through a wall, but completely gone. The last time that happened, it popped up in another testing bay a couple of 100 meters away with no sign of damage or malfunction. Those were the weirdest moments, the ones everyone tried not to talk about in the open. They'd shut down the cameras and erase most of the footage before anyone else saw it. You could feel the tension in the room, like we were poking at something we didn't understand, and probably shouldn't. More than once, people got hurt. Not badly, but enough to make everyone nervous. Muscle strains, headaches, moments of dizziness or confusion right after the tests. One guy I knew, a mechanic named Lyle, collapsed during a shift. He swore he felt like his body was vibrating inside out, like he was being pulled apart and put back together wrong. They rushed him off base, and after that, no one was allowed near the chamber without approval from the top. What stuck with me most wasn't the tech or the injuries, it was how the whole operation seemed to ignore the risks. Warnings from engineers and scientists were brushed aside. The official line was always that these were military-grade experiments, and risks were part of the job. But when something so fragile and unpredictable is involved, it didn't sit right with me. One night, after a long shift, I was heading back to my quarters when I passed near the chamber again. It was off hours, and the whole base was quiet, just the hum of distant generators and the odd bark from my dog Juno, who lived with me in the staff housing. That night, the chamber door was slightly ajar. I thought maybe someone had left it open by mistake. Juno tugged on her leash, restless. I was about to call security when I saw it. A faint shimmer in the air near the doorframe, like heat waves on pavement, but cooler and more precise. It flickered for a second, then disappeared. I backed away slowly. Juno growled low and refused to move closer. A few minutes later, I heard a soft thud from inside the chamber. I couldn't see anything, just a cold, empty room. No vehicle, no machines. Then the door creaked shut on its own. I called security, but when they arrived, they found nothing unusual. The chamber was locked tight, no damage or signs of forced entry. The cameras had gone dark an hour earlier. Nobody claimed to have been near. After that, I stopped hanging around the test chambers. The strange events increased, machines flickering in and out of visibility, unexplained noises, brief power fluctuations in the labs near the testing areas. Sometimes my electronic badge would fail to register when I entered certain rooms, or the lights would flicker as if reacting to something invisible. One night, Juno and I were walking near the outer perimeter when a low hum filled the air. It was steady and pulsing. Nothing mechanical, more like a tone deep under the earth. I looked up and caught a glimpse of a dim, pale light hovering over one of the hangars. It wasn't a spotlight or any aircraft I recognized. The light pulsed softly, then vanished. I tried to tell the higher-ups, but I got vague replies. Nothing out of the ordinary. Standard equipment testing, that kind of thing. The way they dodged questions, the classified status, the silence, it made me uneasy. Eventually, I quit. The longer I stayed, the more I felt like the base was hiding something that wasn't just technology, but something no one wanted to acknowledge. The machines that could phase through walls were just the start. I didn't want to be part of whatever came next. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the spot near my old lab, wondering if those vehicles still vanish and reappear somewhere out there, defying everything we know about physics. Juno sometimes stiffens and looks toward the desert, ears alert, like she senses something invisible. I don't know what was really going on, but I'm certain of one thing. Some of the things we uncovered at Area 51 weren't just secret tech, they were something else, something that doesn't fit, and whatever it wasn't done yet. I was a pilot trainee stationed at Area 51 for about 6 months. Nothing about that place was normal, but the flights we did out over the Nevada desert were some of the strangest experiences I've ever had. I'm not one for wild stories, and I kept my mouth shut for the most part. But looking back now, some things just don't add up. We were flying mostly small single-engine planes, the kind that are twitchy and responsive, perfect for practicing tight maneuvers. My instructor, a guy named Lester, was tough but fair. He'd send us out over this specific stretch of desert, mostly flat with a wide mesa off to the west, and run us through navigation drills. It was routine, except for this one zone where everything seemed to glitch. I first noticed it on my third or fourth solo flight. We were circling near this patch of desert just east of Groom Lake. Nothing too high, maybe 5,000 feet. As I approached that area, my compass started spinning like a broken record. It didn't matter how I banked or turned, it just whirled crazily, refusing to settle on a heading. I figured it was a magnetometer problem and kept flying by relying on visual cues in my GPS, but the radio started acting up too. Static flooded the comms, drowning out Lester's voice. I couldn't hear him at all for a solid minute. Just that loud, high-pitched crackle. It freaked me out enough to pull back and get away from the zone. Lester was surprisingly calm when I got back to base, said the equipment had moments like that, and told me to log it as an electrical interference incident. He didn't say much else, just reminded me to stay sharp. No big deal, right? Except the next time I flew near that same spot, the same thing happened. Compass spinning, radio static, weird electrical stuff. On maybe my fifth or sixth flight, I pushed a little closer to that mesa. The wind was rough that day, gusting hard and shifting fast. But right as I got within a couple miles of that cliff edge, I saw something that froze me in place. There was this huge, dark shape hovering just above the mesa. It didn't look like any aircraft I'd ever seen. It was massive, flat on the bottom, almost rectangular but with rounded edges. It just hung there completely still, despite the wind pushing hard all around it. No engines, no noise, no lights, nothing. I pulled the throttle back, banked to keep it in sight, and tried to radio it in. The static came back full blast. I tried again and again, but no comms. I stared at it, wide-eyed, thinking maybe my mind was playing tricks. The whole time, the shape didn't move a fraction. Then out of nowhere, it just vanished. 1 second it was there, the next there was nothing but empty sky and wind-blown dust. I spent a few moments just hovering, trying to process what I'd seen. I wanted to get closer, but the comms were still down and the instruments were glitching so badly I couldn't trust anything. When I got back to base, I reported what happened, careful to stick to facts and avoid sounding crazy. I told Lester about the shape and the instrument failures. He nodded like he expected something weird, but didn't say much. A few days later, I asked around to see if anyone else had seen anything like it. No one would admit to it, and when I checked the flight logs, my whole flight record from that day was gone. It was like the flight never happened. The computers showed a blank for my plane's tracking, no video footage, nothing. I double-checked with the maintenance guys, and they said the tracking system was operational, no errors. I asked Lester if he knew anything about it. He just shrugged and said some data glitches happen, and pilots sometimes get lost in the system. I got the impression I wasn't supposed to push it. After that, I kept flying, but I stayed away from that mesa. The compass still spun, the radio still hissed when I got close, and the whole area felt off. I never saw that craft again, but I knew it was there, watching somehow. The weirdest part is how normal everything else was. The desert looked the same, the sky was the same, but near that patch of earth, the rules changed. Instruments died. Radio went dead. Something hovered, silent and still, defying logic. I finished my training and left the base shortly after. No one ever mentioned that flight again, and if you look for it in the official records, it's like it never happened. But I remember, and I still wonder what I flew so close to, hovering just out of reach over that lonely Nevada mesa. I woke to the low rumble just after midnight. It wasn't thunder, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, but the whole house trembled like a distant freight train was passing underneath the foundation. I lay still, listening to the bass note grow stronger, then fade into silence. My dog, Bramble, a brindle shepherd mix with a twitchy tail, lifted her head, ears pricked, and whimpered once before settling back down. The next morning, I opened the kitchen window to let in the cool desert air. The glass was fogged over, beads of condensation clinging like dew. I ran my finger across it and watched as a dark shape held its form, a tall figure, arms outstretched, before melting away into a smear. I pressed harder, but there was nothing on the other side. I wiped the glass clean and looked out at the empty backyard. That evening, I sat on the porch with Bramble at my feet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a thin pink glow on the hills. I heard the rumble again, softer this time, like something shifting underground. Bramble growled low, her fur lifting along her spine. I checked the desert floor, just sand, scrub brush, and the old water tank I'd inherited from the farmhouse's previous owner. I told myself it was nothing but the wind, though I knew better. 2 nights later, I woke before dawn. The house vibrated, louder now, and the floorboards hummed. I stumbled into the hallway, feeling the walls pulse around me. Bramble padded behind, panting. I flicked on a lamp in the living room. The windows were gone, completely covered in heavy condensation, chalky like frost, patterns swirling in circles. I reached out and the mist peeled away in lines as if something had run its fingers over the glass. When I pulled my hand back, there was only my own print. I found a flashlight and stepped outside. The gravel crunch under my slippers felt unreal against the rumble in my chest. Bramble sniffed at the air, teeth bared, then bolted toward the fence line. I called her back, but she froze at the corner of the yard, staring into the darkness. I scanned the horizon with the flashlight beam. Nothing moved. No headlights, no animals, just desert shadows shifting in the wind. That afternoon, I drove into town to pick up groceries. The diner's windows were clear, but the locals looked haggard. Old Mr. Larkin said he'd heard the same low-frequency hum for weeks. The waitress, Maria, rubbed her arms and said her windows fogged up even when she turned the heat on full blast. None of them offered an explanation. That night was calm. No tremor, no hum. I slept more deeply than I had in weeks. When I woke at dawn, I found the glass door to the backyard askew, latch unhooked. Bramble was curled on the porch, watching me with worried eyes. I pulled the door closed and latched it, checking every window lock. The condensation was gone, but I could swear I saw footprints in the dirt just outside the threshold, no larger than a child's, leading off toward the hills. 2 days later, the weather turned. A thick fog rolled in right after sunset, swallowing the porch light and gray soup. I closed every curtain and sat by the window with Bramble on my lap. The hum started again, low, steady, vibrating in my teeth. The glass steamed up instantly, patterns forming in the corners. Ghostly shapes. I thought I saw a face, then a hand, then nothing. I stared until my eyes watered. Bramble growled and leaped off my lap, fur bristling. I turned on all the lights and flicked the TV on for company. The news was local channels only, talking about dust storms and rattlesnake sightings. Nothing about low-frequency rumbles or haunted windows. On the 5th night, I ladled tomato soup into bowls for me and Bramble. She liked it chilly on her tongue and sat at the kitchen table. The rumble started just as I took a bite. I dropped my spoon and watched the table tremor, soup sloshing against the rim. Bramble's whiskers twitched. She backed away from her bowl. The glass cabinet doors rattled. Then, all at once, it stopped. The house went silent. Even Bramble went still. I set my hands flat on the table and felt a faint warmth under the surface, pulsing like a heartbeat. I pushed my chair back and left the soup. I needed air. Bramble followed me outside, padding over gravel that was cooled by the night breeze. We stood under a sky full of stars. The fog bank burned off earlier. No sign of movement, no sign of disturber or intruder, just the empty desert breathing under the moon. In the morning, the windows were clear again, and every trace of the night's condensation was gone. The fence line had fresh footprints, small, neat ovals, spaced like someone had been treading carefully. I packed a bag that day, planning to stay with a friend 2 towns over. But every time I ventured beyond the front door, I felt like something watched from beneath my feet, from just under the house, waiting for me to notice. That night, I dreamed of shapes forming on glass, glowing lines etched into walls, and a low hum rising from below. I woke stiff and heavy-eyed, Bramble pressed close against me. I told her everything would be okay, but my own voice sounded distant. At dawn, I opened both my eyes in the front door. The driveway was empty. My suitcase sat where I'd left it. The sun was just clearing the horizon, and for the first time in days, I heard only wind in the sagebrush and Bramble's soft toenails clacking on the porch. I'm still here. I watched the highway, waiting for my friend's truck. The rumble hasn't come back yet. The windows have stayed clear, but I keep feeling like I'm not the one who decided to leave. Someone or something else has been pulling at the edges of this place, and I'm not sure when they'll follow. The trip started out like any other camping weekend. Me, my brother Caleb, and our two friends, Sarah and Tim, drove out to a spot near Groom Lake, just past the edge of the restricted zone. We wanted to get away from the city noise, the cell service, and just spend some nights under the stars with no distractions. I'd been camping around Nevada for years, but this place felt different somehow. Quiet in a way that wasn't normal. We arrived late afternoon on a hot, dry day in early June. The sky was mostly clear, except for a thin haze on the horizon that made the mountains look blurry like an old photo. We picked a spot near some scrub brush, about a mile from the actual lake bed, on a gentle slope where we could see the flat desert stretching out ahead. Our campfire was just starting to crackle when Caleb's dog, a mutt named Roscoe, suddenly stiffened and growled low. Roscoe's usually mellow, so that caught everyone's attention. We all turned toward the direction he was looking. About 200 feet out in the desert, there was this shape hovering low to the ground. At first, we thought it might be some kind of helicopter or maybe a drone, but it made no noise at all. No rotor blades, no engine hum, just this slow, steady glow. It was triangular, about the size of a small car, but with no visible seams or windows. The edges were soft, kind of like a shadow you could reach out and touch. The light wasn't bright, it was more like a dim glow from inside, like it was trying not to be noticed. The whole thing hovered maybe 10 feet off the ground, perfectly still, despite a breeze that was rustling the bushes around us. Then it slowly descended until it touched the sand. Right where it landed, the ground seemed different. I don't know how to explain it. It felt colder underfoot, like the heat of the day had been sucked out in that spot. Caleb stepped closer and bent down to touch the sand. He pulled his hand back quick, like the cold bit at his skin. Roscoe was barking now, but not the usual excited bark. It was sharp, tense, like he was warning us. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the screen went blank. No signal, no battery icon, nothing. Sarah tried her phone, same thing. Tim's watch stopped ticking altogether. We backed up a bit, feeling kind of trapped. The silence was heavy, thick. The craft didn't move or change its light, just sat there. Then, after maybe 5 or 6 minutes, the lights inside the triangle started dimming until it was almost completely dark. Then it rose again, just as silently and smoothly as before, and disappeared straight up into the sky. No engine noise, no bright flash, just gone. The desert around us felt like it exhaled. The tension lifted. The air seemed warmer again, and the breeze picked up as if nothing had happened. We all just sat there for a minute, not saying much. Roscoe settled down, but stayed alert. Eventually, we packed up and left the site early the next morning. None of our devices worked properly for the rest of the day, even hours after we were miles away. The weirdest part was on the drive home. There was this sensation like something was watching us from far away, but every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, there was only empty road and sky. I'm not sure what we saw that night, but it wasn't anything I've ever read about or experienced before. And it definitely wasn't normal desert noise or light. Something about that place changed for a while. Colder, quieter, heavier, and I still wonder if we were just lucky to be there to see it. I was on my last run of the evening when the shipment showed up, just past 11 p.m., the night shift winding down. I drove the forklift out to Dock 12, where half a dozen white crates sat under the floodlights. Nobody told me they were coming. The crates were big, about 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and sealed with these odd symbols I'd never seen before. They looked like interlocking triangles and circles, painted in a dull silver that glinted under the light. I tapped the side of one crate with my gloved knuckles. My breath fogged in the cold air. It didn't feel like normal desert cold. It was more like the inside of a walk-in freezer, the temperature sucking the warmth out of your bones. I called down the hall to Hank, one of the welders, but the radio in my vest crackled and went dead. I hauled one crate onto the forks and rolled it toward the storage bay. The cold seemed to swirl behind me, a drifting fog that parted once I turned the corner. I checked the temperature gauge on the wall, normal for this time of night, low 40s, but the air around those crates felt 10 degrees colder. Inside the storage bay, the other maintenance guys were loading parts into bins. I set the crate down and a hum started low in the walls, like the vibration of a huge transformer. The others looked up. Sarah, who runs logistics, frowned. "You bring these in?" she asked. I shook my head. She ran her hand over one symbol. "I don't recognize these markings." Then the lights flickered. The hum got louder, echoing through the steel beams. I reached for the switch by the door, the emergency backup, but every light in the bay went out, except a single red LED over the crates. The hum faded into nothing, leaving us in pitch dark, except for that red dot. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness to land on the crate's symbols. They glowed, just enough to shine silver. No one said a word. I backed out of the bay, the beam dancing over equipment and cables until we got power back. 30 seconds later, the regular lights clicked on. The hum didn't return, and the crates sat there as if they'd been unloaded weeks ago. The next morning, I checked the logs. Delivery manifest showed crates marked classified, but no origin, no contents. I asked supervision, got a briefing about top secret program requirements, and that was it. I spent the day under the sun, sweeping the hangar floor, but I could feel the weight of those crates behind the fence. That night, I brought my dog, Roscoe, to the base with me. He's a German Shepherd mix I'd adopted last month. I let him run in the yard near the guard station while I checked on the crates. The yard lights cast long shadows in the scrub brush. Roscoe stopped at the fence line, nose in the air, hackles up. He growled low. I shone my flashlight, nothing, but I smelled it again. That same metallic chill like breathing next to ice. I patted Roscoe. "Probably just a draft," I said, though my teeth chattered. I found the bay door unlocked. The crates were gone. No forklift tracks, no skid marks, nothing. I radioed security, but the gate cameras showed an empty bay all night. The only thing left was that red LED above the doorway, still blinking quietly. Over the next few days, the hum returned, soft at first, like an idling engine far away, then louder, thrumming inside the walls of the maintenance tunnels. We all heard it. Welders, electricians, janitors. Sometimes it started in the middle of the afternoon, crept through the pipes, vibrating the fixtures above our heads. When it stopped, there was this weight of silence, like the entire base had exhaled at once. That week, half a dozen of us started having the same dream. I was in the supply bay, crates stacked high, but the lights were off. I could just make out glowing eyes, 2 white pinpricks, floating at the back wall. I woke up gasping, sheets tangled. Sarah said she dreamed it too, except she was outside the bay doors, staring in. Hank said he saw the eyes through a grate in the floor, looking up. We compared notes the next afternoon over coffee. None of us believed in sharing our dreams before, but this was too weird. One night, I was headed back to my quarters when I heard the hum again, low behind the walls of the corridor. Roscoe padded behind me. I followed the sound to a service hatch I'd never noticed before. The grate was warm. I put my hand on it. The hum pulsed through my fingers, steady like a heartbeat. I radioed maintenance. It was my shift. There wasn't anyone left to call. I crouched and pried the grate free. Darkness beyond, cool air flowing up. I shone the beam down the vent. No bottom, just a shaft of black. Roscoe whined and licked my hand. I dropped the grate, heart hammering. The hum faded into silence again. 2 nights later, I was on patrol in the guard tower when the floodlights cut out across the yard. The sky was a clean slate, stars pinpricks above. The comms radio yapped static, then stayed silent. I flicked my torch outside. There, along the fence, I saw shadow shapes moving against the brush, tall and rigid, slipping between the light and the darkness. They looked like soldiers, but too tall, too straight. No movement except they flowed along the fence line like smoke on the breeze. I banged on the glass. Roscoe woke with a start, barking at the dark. The shapes froze where they were and vanished all at once, like slapped water. The floodlights clicked back on. The world returned to normal. I radioed Central. False alarm, must have been wildlife, but my voice cracked. By then I was finished. I went home, keys dangling, Roscoe at my heels. My roommate Mel said she dreamed again last night. "Ah, eyes," she whispered. "White eyes in the dark." Roscoe padded by her door, nose low, ears pinned. Now I try to forget what happened, but I keep my flashlight by the bed, and Roscoe follows me whenever I get up for water. Sometimes I swear I feel the hum behind the walls of the house, and those eyes at the window glowing faint white until I blink, and they're gone. I got the call around 10 that night. Hangar D4 needed a scrub down after the new drop-off. I grabbed my gear and my dog, Riley, a short-haired mutt with pointy ears and a nervous energy that made him perfect for late-night shifts. The desert was cooling off, but the air still smelled of sun-baked metal when we rolled up to the base gate. Scanner light blinked green, and Riley's tail wagged once before he settled back into the cab. Hangar D4 sat in near-complete darkness. No floodlights, just a single motion-activated bulb above the door. I clipped my ID badge to the reader, heard the lock click, and stepped inside. Riley nosed the ground, sniffing crates and coiled cables. I flicked on my headlamp and leaned my mop in the corner. The hangar was cavernous, silent, except for the soft hum of the air handlers overhead. I started at the far end, using the pressure washer to rinse oil stains from the concrete floor. Riley followed, paws slapping wet patches. The water pooled around a stack of wooden pallets, then drained into floor grates. Up close, the walls looked like they'd been sprayed yesterday. Fresh paint, no scuffs. The only things stored here were empty flight cases and a single rolling ladder. I climbed it to wipe overhead pipes, and that's when I noticed the noise, a low, rhythmic vibration, almost like a distant pulse. I froze, hand on the ladder rail. Riley stiffened at the bottom, ears up. I called out, "You hear that?" But the echo swallowed my voice. The pulse stopped, and only the air handler hum remained. I shrugged and wiped my brow, then climbed down. As I wheeled the ladder back, the lights flickered, bright then dim. Riley barked once and darted toward the hangar door. I jogged after him, but the door didn't budge. The scanner panel glowed red. No power. I patted Riley's head. "Hold on, buddy." I tapped the light switch by the door. Nothing. The overhead bulb snapped on instead, spilling yellow light over the middle of the floor. I reached for my phone's flashlight, but the battery icon blinked red. I pulled my radio from my vest and tried channel 3. Static crackled sharp, then silence. Maybe the base had a brief outage. I needed to keep going. I set the ladder by the crates and grabbed a broom. As I swept, the beam of my headlamp caught something at the edge of the shadows. I stopped, broom in midair. There it was, a disc-shaped outline hovering silently 10 feet off the ground, just past the stacked pallets. Perfect circle, a solid dark that swallowed the light. But it was covered in something, like a soap film so thin you could only see it shimmer when the beam passed over the curve. Riley whined and nosed at the air. I stood still, heart pounding, watching the shimmer ripple where the film clung to the object's edge. The air smelled faintly of burnt ozone, like after a lightning strike. I lifted my gloved hand toward it. My fingers passed through mist before I stopped myself. I blinked. The disc was gone. I jerked my headlamp around, nothing but empty space. The beam rested on the pallets, the hanging ladder, the far wall. Riley circled me, low growl in his throat. My broom felt heavy in my hands. I backed away, sweeping backwards until the yellow bulb overhead popped, flickered, and died. We were in darkness again. I scrambled for my phone. Dead. The only light was Riley's red collar glow, and the faint starlight spilling in under the hangar door. I guided Riley to my side and felt the wall for the exit door. My hand brushed the keypad, green this time, and the door unlatched with a groan. We slipped out into the cool night, the gate's floodlights snapping on behind us. The hangar door closed itself with a final click. By the time I re-engaged the scanner and radio, everything was back online. The hum of the base fell into place. A patrol ATV rolled by, its driver eyeing me and Riley. "Everything okay?" he called. "Just a flicker," I said, voice tight. "Power blip." He grunted and rode off into the desert quiet night. I loaded up the gear and drove home. Riley slept in the passenger seat, snoring lightly, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Hangar D4's dark silhouette. On my truck's dash, the clock blinked 12:03, though I was certain it was closer to 1 a.m. At home, I set the broom by the back door and checked on Riley. He stared at the hallway like he remembered something. I lay in bed, but tossed and turned, convinced I saw soap-thin ripples on my bedroom wall when I blinked. When dawn came, I drove back to the base to drop off equipment. I peered into Hangar D4 through the tiny window in the door. Empty. Lights off, no sign of the disc, no scorched concrete, not even a greasy fingerprint where I'd reached out. Later, in the weld shop, one of the mechanics asked if I'd lost sleep. I shrugged. Just a bad breaker, I think. Back at home that night, I found my mop lying across the hallway floor like someone had dropped it in a hurry. I set it upright, Riley following every move. I closed the door and turned off the lights, leaving only the street lamp glow in the window. I lay there listening for the hum, half expecting the thin shimmer to drift across the wall. Instead, I heard Riley's steady breathing and the quiet hum of my refrigerator downstairs. Normal. And yet I felt the memory of something that didn't belong. A perfect circle, smooth and still, cloaked in impossibly thin film, gone in a blink, leaving nothing but the smell of ozone and a question I couldn't shake. I was checking the fence line just after sunset when Duncan, my Australian Shepherd mix, froze beside me and let out a low whine. The air was still, heavy with the heat of the day sliding away, and the sky was that dusty rose you get out here in Rachel, where Groom Lake sits just beyond the horizon. I'd been up here doing this for 10 years. Ranching ain't glamorous, but it's steady work. That night felt different. I climbed down from the fence line post and walked toward the pens, calling for Duncan. He patted at my side, ears pricked. The cattle were milling around, lowing softly, but something made them twitch their tails and lean their heads away. I figured a coyote was circling, but when I swept my flashlight across the brush, there was nothing. Then I saw them, 3 figures moving between the feeder and the far gate. They were tall, at least a head taller than me, but unbelievably thin. Their limbs looked stretched. Arms hung down past their knees, legs too long for the torsos. They stepped in slow sync, the cattle scattering at their approach. I blinked and Duncan barked, low and urgent. The figures stopped, turned toward me. From my angle, their faces were nothing but shadows. No features, just darkness where eyes should be. They lifted one arm in unison, like a slow wave, and started walking away. Their pacing was smooth, almost gliding. I swallowed. "Hey!" I called, hoping they'd answer. They didn't. Instead, they slid between the pens and out of sight into the low scrub. I crouched by the rail, heart thumping. Duncan stayed close, tail stiff. The cattle stamped and mooed. I shined the flashlight down the trail. No silhouettes, just rock and sage. Then came the lights. At first, I thought a patrol truck was coming down the service road, but those beams were too high, maybe 30 feet in the air, and they blinked in a perfect grid. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes, pause. The blinking went on for minutes, hovering at the horizon beyond my calf pastures. I checked my watch, 8:12 p.m. The lights didn't make a sound, no motor hum, no static on the radio. I reached for my phone, no signal out here. My truck was a quarter-mile away, parked by the barn. I debated running for it, then thought better of leaving the cattle alone. The figures reappeared, stepping out of the brush at the edge of the blinking lights. Their silhouettes were crisp against the glow. They walked toward the lights, and the lights pulsed brighter when they got close, as if greeting them. I wanted to get closer, but my legs felt heavy and slow. Duncan tugged at his leash, whining to go back. I let him lead me to the barn. Safer, I figured. The flickering reflected off the corrugated side, making dancing shadows on the wall. Inside, I grabbed the rifle from its rack, not because I expected a firefight, but I needed something to steady myself. Hugging it, I cracked the sliding door open a sliver and peered out. The blinking was exactly where I'd left it, and the tall figures, or whatever they were, moved among the lights. Never rushing, always deliberate. I pulled the door closed and latched it. My lantern flickered. Duncan leaned against my leg, his eyes on the door. I waited 20 minutes before I dared step back out. The blinking was gone, the figures gone, and the horizon was dark except for the moon. The desert looked empty. The cattle were quiet, grazing again as if nothing had happened. I walked the perimeter in the pale moonlight, shining my beam into every corner. No prints aside from my own and Duncan's. No signs of people or vehicles, just shrubs and rocks. By the time I got back inside, sweat had soaked through my shirt. I sat on a bale of hay and called my neighbor's number. He rode fence for the next spread over, but the line went to voicemail. I left a scrambled message. Hey, saw something. Better drop by. I lay in my bunk bed that night, Duncan on the floor, and listened to the ranch fan spin. The moonlight traced a stripe across the floor. I thought about the figures, limbs too long, faces too dark, and the lights blinking at the horizon as if marking a door in the sky. Morning came slow. I fed the cattle, checked fences under a pale sun. No lights, no shapes. But my mind kept drifting to the west, to that dead-still cluster of shrubs where they vanished. I stacked hay bales at the barn, and my neighbor rolled in on his ATV, coffee in hand. I pointed out the way I'd seen the shapes in the lights. He shook his head. Must have been firelight reflections, he said, or a crop sprayer with a broken nav light. He clapped his hands, rattling the rifle rack. I nodded, even though I didn't believe it. Later, I climbed into my pickup and drove the strip beyond the ranch boundary. Nothing but desert, fence posts, the service road's curve. Back home, I put Duncan on his leash and walked out to the pens one more time. The cattle watched us, slow chewing. I clicked my tongue and they scattered. I leaned on the rail, breathing high. Every rustle of sage made me turn, but day was full color and solid. No shadows stretched too thin. Tonight I'll sleep on the porch in a lawn chair, gun across my lap, Duncan at my feet. I'll watch that horizon for a flicker. Maybe tomorrow I'll find prints in the dust at that service road turn. Prints that start and just stop. I was driving through Nevada on that run, hauling freight from Reno down toward Phoenix. The route took me close to the edges of the desert where the mesas rise up, just past the more official roads near Area 51. I'd done that stretch dozens of times, mostly at night or early morning, but that day was different. It was early June, late afternoon, and the heat was still sticking to the cab of my truck. I remember watching the sun dip low, casting long shadows over the rocky formations that line the highway. The air was dry with a slight wind kicking up dust now and then. Nothing unusual, really, just the same open road I'd been on before. I was rolling along, listening to some country on the radio, when I saw the convoy ahead. At first, I thought it was one of those military convoys you sometimes catch sight of in this part of the country. About 10 trucks, big rigs, and smaller armored vehicles, all lined up in a row on the highway shoulder. Usually when I see those, they keep moving. But these weren't. They were all stopped, engines off, no movement, just sitting there like statues. I slowed down to get a better look, figuring maybe there was some kind of accident or checkpoint. But there was no roadblock, no flashing lights, no officers standing around. Just the trucks, all lined up perfectly. The drivers and passengers were outside, standing in small groups, just looking at something off to the side, beyond the edge of the road. That's when I saw it. A massive orb hanging between two mesas maybe 100 yards off the highway. It was huge, way bigger than any helicopter or drone I'd ever seen. The surface wasn't smooth or metallic. It almost looked like a dull pearl, glowing faintly from inside. It pulsed with this soft, steady light, like the whole thing was breathing quietly. The color shifted slowly between pale blue and faint amber. There was no noise, no engine, no hum, nothing. The desert was still except for the wind and the faint rustle of scrub brush. The men standing near their trucks didn't move, didn't talk. They just stared, completely frozen, like the orb had silenced them. I caught my breath. Something about the scene felt completely unreal. I looked down at my dashboard to make sure I wasn't seeing things, but everything was normal. The radio was static but no interference, the gauges steady. I didn't want to get too close, so I kept my distance but rolled the window down to listen. No sound came from the orb. I thought maybe it was a trick of light or some kind of training exercise, but nothing about it made sense. No other vehicles on the highway, no signs of people moving around except those frozen guys. After what felt like several minutes, the orb started to rise slowly between the mesas. As it lifted, the pulsing light dimmed, and the men near the trucks seemed to snap out of it. They shifted, moved, like waking from a trance. Engines started up, and the convoy began to roll again, exactly as if nothing had happened. I stayed behind, staring at where the orb had been until it was completely gone, leaving only the desert and the fading sun. When I finally pulled back onto the highway and got going again, it was like the whole thing was wiped clean from the world. No emergency crews arrived, no traffic on the radio mentioned anything. Even when I stopped at a gas station a few miles later, the clerk looked at me like I was crazy when I asked about a military convoy stopping. I checked my watch, too. An hour had passed, but it felt like 5 or 10 minutes at most. The light faded quickly as night fell, and I kept thinking I should call someone, but the words wouldn't come. That night, parked in a motel near Beatty, I stared out the window at the stars. The desert felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Roscoe, my dog, usually restless in new places, was unusually calm beside me. I kept looking for lights on the horizon, or some sign the orb was back. Nothing came. The next morning, the convoy was nowhere to be seen, no tracks or signs on the road. It was just me, Roscoe, and the empty desert stretching out like it always had. I don't know what I saw out there between those mesas. Maybe it was a military experiment, some kind of new, maybe something else. But whatever it was, it wasn't just a truck convoy stopping for a break. There was a weight to that moment, a silence that felt deliberate, like the desert had been waiting for something none of us were supposed to notice. And for the rest of that trip, I kept looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was being watched, or if whatever it was still out there just beyond the edge of the road. I wasn't expecting to camp near the perimeter fence of Area 51, not like some thrill seeker or conspiracy nut. I just wanted to get away from everything for a couple of nights. No phone, no internet, just me and my dog, Scout. I figured the desert would be quiet enough. I'd been out that way a few times before, but never this close to the fence. It was late September, early fall in Nevada, so the nights were cooling off, but still had that dry desert air. I picked a spot maybe 100 feet from the chain link fence, just off this gravel service road that runs along the boundary. There was a flat patch of sand with some scrub brush, enough room for my little tent. Scout was restless at first, but settled down once I got a fire going. The first night was uneventful, except for the usual distant hum of the highway and the occasional chirp of desert critters. I kept the fire low, not wanting to draw any attention. The fence was maybe 30 yards away, and I could just make out the shadows of the watchtowers beyond, the ones with the bright floodlights that swung slowly across the desert. Around midnight, I noticed the power flicker. The floodlights on the towers dimmed and then shut off completely, like someone flipped a giant switch. It was strange. The whole area fell into sudden darkness. The desert night swallowed the place. No lights, no sounds except the breeze and Scout's quiet breathing. I thought it might be some kind of power failure, but then came the light. From deep inside the base, beyond the fence and the dark towers, I saw it. Faint pulses of light. They were rhythmic, almost like a signal. A soft glow, bluish white, that blinked in a slow, steady pattern. It wasn't like the floodlights or vehicle headlights, more like something deliberate. I sat up straighter, trying to figure out what was going on. Scout's ears perked too, and he growled low at the fence. The pulses lasted maybe 3 minutes, sometimes fading almost to nothing, then brightening again. I tried to count the rhythm, but it was irregular enough to throw me off. I was about to grab my phone when the power suddenly snapped back on. The floodlights blazed alive again, harsh and wide. But when I looked toward where the pulses had come from, it was just quiet. The area was empty. No guards walking patrol, no vehicles idling or engines running. The usual low hum of machines I'd heard before was gone. It was like the whole sector had paused. I watched for nearly an hour, but nothing moved. Scout stayed tense, staring at the fence like he could see through it. Eventually, I started to relax, telling myself maybe it was a glitch or some kind of equipment test. The desert night returned to its usual quiet. The next morning, I woke early, sipping coffee outside my tent. Scout was sniffing around, digging a little here and there. When I looked down at the sand near where I'd been sitting the night before, I saw something that made my skin crawl. Several perfectly round burn marks in the sand. They were maybe the size of a dinner plate, blackened in the center with rings fading out to the edges. They didn't look like campfire scorch marks or anything from my stove. No rocks or fire pits nearby. Just these odd, circular burns in an otherwise untouched patch of sand. I walked along the fence line, scanning for footprints or tire tracks. Nothing but my own tracks and Scout's paw prints. No sign anyone had been near us. No vehicles, no footprints from guards. I packed up and left right after breakfast. I didn't want to stick around. Something about those burn marks and that blackout didn't feel right. Like I'd been watched. Maybe tested, without knowing it. Back home, I tried looking up if anyone else had seen strange lights or power glitches near the base, but there's never any official word. I kept the photos I took of the burn marks, but the images didn't capture the way they looked in person. Oddly precise, almost unnatural. Sometimes at night, I swear I can still see those pulses in my mind, slow and steady, coming from somewhere just beyond the fence. And Scout won't sleep near me without keeping his ears up, as if whatever it was out there left something behind. I've lived out here on the outskirts of Rachel, Nevada, for most of my life. My family's ranch is maybe 6-7 miles from that fenced-off government patch everyone calls Area 51. Most folks around here don't like to talk about what goes on near the base, but I've seen things over the years that I can't explain. I'm not the type to spin wild stories, but what I'm about to say is real, even if I don't fully understand it. For a while now, we've had these helicopters, unmarked, no logos or numbers, that come out after dark. They're loud when they fly in, low and slow, patrolling just above the desert scrub. But sometimes they'll suddenly stop and hover so quietly that you could hear a pin drop if it wasn't for the faint whir of the blades. It's weird, the way they just hang there, motionless against the night sky, as if listening or watching something. One night, maybe 2 months ago, I was out checking on the herd. It was just past midnight, the kind of late where the desert is quiet except for the occasional breeze. I had my old dog, Rufus, with me, a lean border collie mix with sharp eyes and a nervous energy. He kept pacing, ears pinned back, like he felt something in the air. The moon was a thin sliver, barely lighting the desert. I was near the eastern fence line of the ranch, which is the closest side to the base. The helicopters had been buzzing around earlier, but had quieted down. That's when I saw it. There was a figure standing just beyond the barbed wire fence, maybe 50 yards out. At first, I thought it was one of the base guards, but this was different. The shape was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, but it didn't move. Not even a twitch. No shifting weight or breathing signs. It just stood there, perfectly still like a statue. I called out softly, "Hey, you out there?" But there was no response. Rufus growled low in his throat and pulled at the leash, trying to back away. The figure didn't flinch. I squinted, trying to make out details. The desert heat had cooled, and the air was still. The shape looked odd. Its edges seemed too smooth, like it was wrapped in some kind of skin that didn't reflect the moonlight properly. It didn't look like a man in a uniform or any clothing I knew. After a few minutes, I blinked, and it was gone. Just vanished. I swear I didn't see it walk away. 1 second it was there. The next, it was like someone erased it. I felt my heart beat faster, and Rufus barked sharply. I called to the figure again, but nothing answered. I spent the next hour searching the area, flashlight swinging over the desert floor, but no footprints or tracks led away from the fence. The sand looked untouched except for my own prints and Rufus's paw marks. It was like whatever it was didn't leave anything behind. Since that night, the cattle have been acting strange. Normally, they're calm at dusk, milling about or settling down. But lately, they're skittish, constantly looking toward the fence line. They jump and stamp at shadows or the faintest sound. Then, a few weeks after I saw that figure, I started noticing some of the cattle missing. Not a couple here or there, but several spread out over different parts of the ranch. No tracks from coyotes, no signs of mountain lions or other predators. The ground near where they vanished was clean. No blood, no hair, no drag marks. I checked with neighbors, but nobody else reported missing stock. I thought maybe I was imagining things, but the numbers don't lie. One night, while walking near the same fence line with Rufus, I heard that eerie whirring noise again. The helicopters were back, circling low. Then one stopped right above us, silent as a ghost. I looked up just in time to see a flicker of light from the base, like a camera flash or a distant spotlight. For a moment, the hovering helicopter seemed to shimmer like a heat haze or a mirage bending its edges. Rufus froze and whimpered. I wanted to move, to get out of there, but something kept me rooted. The helicopter stayed motionless for what felt like an eternity, then suddenly vanished into the night sky with no sound or warning. Since then, I keep a close watch, especially near the fence. The nights stretch longer, and the desert feels colder, quieter in a way that doesn't make sense. I'm not the same about it. I don't bring friends out here anymore. I don't leave Rufus alone. I've never reported any of this to the authorities. I'm not sure it would do any good. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know more. But every night when the helicopters come back and the fence line grows still, I feel like I'm being watched. Like whatever that thing was, it's still out there, just beyond reach, waiting for something. I worked security at the base near Groom Lake, Area 51 as everyone calls it, for about 5 years. Not the kind of job where you get to stroll around in the daylight waving at tourists or whatever. It was mostly nights, late shifts, staring out into the desert, watching for anything unusual. Standard protocol said to keep an eye on the perimeter, check the fences, and report any trespassers or wildlife. But sometimes the rules changed. They didn't announce it over the radios or post anything new on the bulletin boards. It was just shifted. One day, the usual rounds got replaced with orders to monitor the skies. No further explanation. No extra patrols, just watch. That was the beginning of what we came to call the blackout shifts. The lights inside the compound dimmed, radios went silent except for whispers, and the usual hum of machines seemed to fade. One night in particular sticks with me. I was on the East Observation Tower, which looks out over the desert and the salt flats beyond. The sky was clear, dry, and cold for early spring, around 2 in the morning. The stars were out in force, the Milky Way stretching like a bright ribbon overhead. I was used to the black desert night, the occasional coyote howl or the distant drone of a low-flying plane. But that night, something else happened. Without warning, dozens of glowing orbs appeared, hovering silently in the sky. At first, I thought it was some kind of training exercise, flare tests or drones, maybe, but they didn't move like anything I'd seen before. The orbs moved in perfect formation, shifting from tight clusters to long lines like birds in migration, but completely silent and smooth. No noise from engines, no blinking lights, no radio chatter. The weirdest part was the way they bent the light. If you looked straight at them, they shimmered, almost like heat waves above a desert road, but steadier, more solid. Sometimes they'd flicker out, only to reappear a little to the left or right. There was no sense of physical mass, but they definitely had presence. I called it in, but the comms were dead, just static and that odd silence. It was like the whole base was holding its breath. I watched for maybe 20 minutes before the orbs slowly drifted off, like moving toward the northwest horizon and disappearing over the mountains. I grabbed my binoculars and tried scanning the area, but the radars, at least the ones I had access to, showed nothing. Absolutely nothing. I reported it the next day through official channels, but the response was canned. Unidentified aerial phenomena consistent with classified aircraft testing. Details classified. Nothing more. There were other nights like that. Shifts when the whole compound went quiet and all we did was watch the sky. Sometimes the orbs came back, sometimes not. But each time, the light bending and the silence remained. Nothing you could touch or shoot at. Just shapes shifting in the night, impossible to track and impossible to explain. Most of the guys on my team tried to ignore it or joke about it, but I know what I saw. It wasn't drones, not flares, or any military craft I'd ever read about or seen in manuals. And it wasn't natural. It moved too precisely, too smoothly, like something alive but not quite alive. After I left the base, I kept looking up at the night sky, half expecting to see those orbs again. I never did. But sometimes when the wind is just right and the desert air goes completely still, I swear I can feel something out there watching. Not hostile, just watching. That's all I got. No crazy stories, no abductions, no government conspiracies. Just nights spent staring into the desert sky, waiting for something no one else seemed to notice. I worked at Area 51 for just over a year, mostly on the security team. Not the kind of job that gets talked about much, obviously. I was one of the guys running the checkpoints, the biometric scans, making sure no one slipped in without proper clearance. You'd think those machines were foolproof, but they weren't. Not entirely. There was this one checkpoint near the back gate, the one that leads into a restricted zone even fewer people know about. The biometric scanners there were supposed to be top-notch. Retina, fingerprint, voice recognition, all the usual stuff, plus some proprietary tech I never fully understood. The higher-ups said it was state-of-the-art. Problem was, sometimes the scans just didn't work right. Not like error, try again, but more like the sensors glitched or refused to pick up any data. The machines would freeze for a moment, then reject the person standing there. Usually, it was just a malfunction. But every now and then, the system would reject the right people, people with valid clearances, and accept someone who wasn't supposed to be there at all. The kind of glitch that made you want to walk away and never look back. That checkpoint had a weird vibe to it. I don't mean ghost stories or anything dumb like that. It just felt off. The cameras would sometimes show strange shadows or flickers. The sensors occasionally picked up electromagnetic interference nobody could explain. We were told to report it, but never to speculate. One night, I was running a late shift alone. The base was quieter than usual. Most personnel were off duty or working inside. The desert wind was soft, barely a whisper, and the moon was low, spilling pale light over the tarmac. I remember it because the sky was cloudless and the stars were pinpricks all over. Around 2:30 a.m., an alarm beeped on my console. A biometric scan had just cleared a person at the back gate checkpoint, except this person wasn't in the system. No clearance, no ID badge, no record. That never happened. The screen showed a figure approaching the scanner. At first, I thought it was a prank or a glitch, but the scanners accepted the person and the gate opened. I reached for the radio to report it, but the comms crackled and cut out for a few seconds before coming back. The person on the screen moved smoothly, almost gliding. They wore a dark uniform, but the thing was, their face didn't show up clearly on any camera feed. It wasn't like the image was grainy or the camera was out of focus. It was like the face was just missing. The camera showed the outline of a head and shoulders, but no features. No eyes, nose, mouth, nothing. I tried zooming in, checking every angle available, but the face remained a blank space. I flipped through the adjacent cameras. None captured the person before or after the gate. It was like they'd appeared for the scan, then vanished. I checked the logs. No ID number, no access permissions. Whoever it was, they didn't exist in any database. The system was baffled. For a few minutes, I thought it was a technical fault, maybe a corrupted data stream or a camera glitch. But then, about 5 minutes after the gate opened, the camera feed stopped working entirely for the back gate checkpoint. The screens froze on static for maybe 10 seconds, then rebooted, showing normal feeds again. But the figure was gone. No trace of the person. I radioed the control tower, but the radio was dead. Nothing but static. I started walking toward the checkpoint, feeling the hairs on my neck stand up. Outside, the desert was quiet except for the distant hum of generators. I scanned the area with my flashlight. No footprints, no disturbed dust, nothing unusual. I tried to shake it off and report to my supervisor. When I asked about the event the next day, everyone acted like they had no idea what I was talking about. The footage I'd seen was missing from the archives. No record existed of that person passing through or of the cameras glitching. Days later, the biometric scanners at the back gate checkpoint continued to behave oddly. Sometimes, they'd reject authorized personnel for no reason, or the system would lock up entirely. Nobody ever found an explanation, and the higher-ups started rerouting traffic away from that checkpoint, as if they wanted to pretend it never happened. I quit not long after. The whole thing left me unsettled in a way I can't really explain. Whatever that was, it wasn't a malfunction. At least, not a typical one. It's just one of those things you keep in the back of your mind when you think you know everything about your job, only to realize there's stuff no one can explain, and maybe no one ever will. I never meant to get close to Area 51. Honestly, it wasn't some planned mission or anything like that, more like dumb curiosity and bad timing. I'd been camping out in the Nevada desert for a few days, just trying to get away from everything. My dog, Rusty, was with me. He's this scrappy little mutt with a lot of energy and a weird bark that always sounds like he's trying to talk. It was late summer, around dusk, and the sky was clear but starting to darken. I was hiking along this rough trail that led toward the edges of the Groom Lake area. Nothing marked the boundary, just those giant fences way off in the distance, but I figured walking around the outskirts wouldn't hurt. I'd seen videos of people sneaking close before, and I wanted to see what the fuss was about, what this secret base really looked like up close. Rusty was sniffing around, and I wasn't paying much attention when I suddenly got this prickling feeling like I wasn't alone. The desert was quiet except for the wind brushing through the sparse brush. Then, without any sound to warn me, this unmarked black pickup rolled up on the dirt road just a few feet away. I swear I didn't hear an engine or tires, nothing. It was like it appeared out of thin air. The driver's window slid down slowly. I looked up, and the man inside wasn't what I expected. His eyes caught the dim light, but not in a usual way. They glowed faintly, this pale, eerie light, not a reflection and not normal. It was subtle but unmistakable, like those eyes were lit from inside, glowing just enough to be creepy but not glaring. He didn't say a word, just stared straight at me, and I mean stared, like he was looking through me, reading everything. No warning, no "hey, you shouldn't be here," just this intense cold gaze. Rusty started growling low, his hackles raised, but the guy didn't flinch. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, the driver rolled the window back up and the truck slid away silently, disappearing down the dirt path and into the night. No headlights, no noise, just gone. The desert went back to being quiet again, except for Rusty's breathing and the distant hum of cicadas. I didn't hang around to see if they'd come back. I booked it back toward my campsite, constantly looking over my shoulder. I kept thinking maybe I'd been watched for hours before that, maybe even days. But that moment with the truck was the first time I saw anyone, or anything, face to face. When I got home, I told a couple friends, but they just laughed it off, said maybe it was a trick of the light or some local with weird contact lenses. But I can't shake the feeling it was more than that. The way the guy moved, the silence, the glow in his eyes, none of it added up. Sometimes I wonder if Rusty saw more than I did, because since that night he's been skittish, especially around open spaces and after dark. I don't think we'll ever really know what I ran into, but I'm pretty sure I wasn't the one in control that night. I worked at Area 51 for a few years, not in the usual pilot or security roles, but down in maintenance. Most folks think the base is just runways and hangars, but there's a whole underground network nobody talks about. They called them the maintenance tunnels. I'm still not sure why, because they didn't just house pipes or cables. The tunnels were weird, and no official document ever mentioned them. I mostly cleaned those tunnels. Not glamorous work. Just me, a flashlight, a mop, and a bucket. The air was always dry and cold, even when it was blazing outside. The walls weren't normal concrete, they were smooth, almost too perfect, and etched all over them were strange geometric symbols. Lines, triangles, circles, arranged in patterns that didn't make sense. At first, I thought it was just some kind of technical markings or code, but these shapes glowed faintly in the dark, a dull blue light that pulsed slowly. It wasn't bright enough to light the whole tunnel, just enough to give off an eerie glow. Nobody ever explained what the symbols were or who put them there. I asked once, but the supervisors just gave me a look and changed the subject. We were told not to talk about it. The whole place had that secretive vibe, but the tunnels were a different level, like they were hiding something bigger. Most of the time, my shifts were quiet, just the hum of the ventilation system and the scrape of my mop on the floor. But sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch movement, shadows that didn't belong to me. I'd look directly, but there was never anything there, just a flicker, something slipping out of sight too fast to be human. Once, I swear I saw a figure, a shape tall and thin, pause behind a corner, then vanish when I turned the light toward it. I told a coworker once, This other maintenance guy named Jonas. He said he'd noticed it too, but that nobody wanted to admit it. Said it might be staff from higher up or maybe something else. We didn't joke about it, not really. It felt like whatever was down there wasn't supposed to be seen. One night, I was working a late shift. The base was mostly empty, and the tunnels were darker than usual because some of the auxiliary lights were off for maintenance. I was near one of the deeper sections, a part where the walls narrowed and the symbols glowed more brightly. I stopped to take a break, leaning against the wall. That's when I heard it, a faint sound like scratching or tapping coming from the shadows just ahead. I called out, but no answer. I shined my flashlight into the darkness, but the beam just bounced off the walls. The scratching stopped, then started again, softer this time, like someone or something was moving behind the wall. I was about to leave when the light in the tunnel flickered and went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, except for the faint glow from the symbols. I dropped my flashlight. The noise stopped instantly, replaced by a heavy silence. I tried to calm myself, reached for my phone to use its light, but it was dead. No signal, of course, not that it mattered down there. After what felt like forever, the tunnel lights clicked back on. I was alone. No sign of whatever had made the noise. I left the tunnels early that night. When I told my boss about the outage, he acted like it was nothing, just a routine power glitch. But I wasn't so sure. The weirdest part was when I tried to check the security footage of the tunnels. Every video from that night was missing. Not corrupted, just gone. Like someone or something deleted them. After a few more incidents like that, I quit. The shadows, the symbols, the silent watchers, it wasn't for me. I never told anyone else because I knew how it'd sound, but those tunnels were real, and whatever was moving in the dark, I'm not convinced it was human. I never meant to get close to Area 51. Honestly, it wasn't some planned mission or anything like that. More like dumb curiosity and bad timing. I'd been camping out in the Nevada desert for a few days, just trying to get away from everything. My dog, Rusty, was with me. He's this scrappy little mutt with a lot of energy and a weird bark that always sounds like he's trying to talk. It was late summer, around dusk, and the sky was clear but starting to darken. I was hiking along this rough trail that led toward the edges of the Groom Lake area. Nothing marked the boundary, just those giant fences way off in the distance. But I figured walking around the outskirts wouldn't hurt. I'd seen videos of people sneaking close before, and I wanted to see what the fuss was about. What this secret base really looked like, up close. Rusty was sniffing around, and I wasn't paying much attention when I suddenly got this prickling feeling like I wasn't alone. The desert was quiet except for the wind brushing through the sparse brush. Then, without any sound to warn me, this unmarked black pickup rolled up on the dirt road just a few feet away. I swear I didn't hear an engine or tires. Nothing. It was like it appeared out of thin air. The driver's window slid down slowly. I looked up, and the man inside wasn't what I expected. His eyes caught the dim light, but not in a usual way. They glowed faintly, this pale, eerie light. Not a reflection and not normal. It was subtle but unmistakable. Like those eyes were lit from inside, glowing just enough to be creepy but not glaring. He didn't say a word, just stared straight at me, and I mean stared, like he was looking through me, reading everything. No warning, no hey, you shouldn't be here, just this intense, cold gaze. Rusty started growling low, his hackles raised, but the guy didn't flinch. After what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds, the driver rolled the window back up, and the truck slid away silently, disappearing down the dirt path and into the night. No headlights, no noise, just gone. The desert went back to being quiet again, except for Rusty's breathing and the distant hum of cicadas. I didn't hang around to see if they'd come back. I booked it back toward my campsite, constantly looking over my shoulder. I kept thinking maybe I'd been watched for hours before that, maybe even days. But that moment with the truck was the first time I saw anyone or anything face to face. When I got home, I told a couple friends, but they just laughed it off, said maybe it was a trick of the light or some local with weird contact lenses. But I can't shake the feeling it was more than that. The way the guy moved, the silence, the glow in his eyes, None of it added up. Sometimes I wonder if Rusty saw more than I did, because since that night he's been skittish, especially around open spaces and after dark. I don't think we'll ever really know what I ran into, but I'm pretty sure I wasn't the one in control that night. I flipped the last omelet of the morning shift when I heard the tray go clatter behind me. I looked up to see it sliding back onto the counter, perfectly clean, silver sheen intact, as if someone had nudged it into place. The tray was meant for the west wall section, where security staff ate in shifts. It had breakfast burritos, fruit, coffee, all of it untouched. I frowned and called out, "Hey, you changing your mind?" No answer. Normally someone would call back or shuffle in. Nothing. The air smelled faintly metallic, like licking a coin. I shrugged it off as a glitch and moved on to refill the scrambled eggs. Over the next week, it happened 4 more times. Trays returned untouched. The smell always lingered, tinny, cold. Some days it was easy to think I'd misheard the buzzer or misread the order ticket. But then there was the table. I was wiping down the long cafeteria table near the windows, those huge panes that look out over Groom Lake, when I noticed 3 dark patches, hand-shaped and scorched, about the size of a grown man's palm, pressed into the formica surface. No burns on the floor beneath, nothing on the ceiling, just the smooth matte tabletop. My heart thumped. I radioed maintenance. They came, poked around, shrugged. "Must be a chemical spill," they said, testing the surface with some gadget that lit up green. I watched them log it as a cleaning issue. Nobody mentioned the handprints. By evening, a supervisor had them wiped off and repainted over so quickly I couldn't even catch the paint code they used. Something changed after that. My coworkers went quiet. Chef Tony, who always hummed opera while he stirred soup, stopped whistling altogether. Lynn, the dishwasher, kept glancing over her shoulder when she took out the garbage. And I caught the new sous chef, Mara, staring at the door like she expected someone to burst in at any moment. The next day, I heard whispers in the pantry, low voices talking too fast. I cracked the door, expecting to catch them on break, but it was empty. Just the hum of the walk-in cooler and the distant clang of plates in the dish pit. That night, I left late, rolling my cart back to the walk-in. The hallway lights flickered, and the freezer door groaned as if on its hinges. I flicked on my flashlight and tried to laugh at myself. "After all this time, Greg," I muttered, "you still jump at shadows." I reached for the freezer handle, saw my breath fog the beam, and froze. On the floor in front of me were 2 more hand-shaped scorch marks, smaller this time, like a kid's palms, pressed into the vinyl tile. No scorch pattern on the fridge door, no melted linoleum anywhere else. I snapped a photo with my phone. The flash lit the whole coal corridor for a second before cutting out. The tiles looked unmarked in the photo. I left the walk-in door open, eyeing the hallway until my cart clattered itself to the kitchen. At the cook line, I texted Tony, "Did you see footprints by freezer? Weird handprints." No reply. The following morning, the freezers were unplugged for routine maintenance, and the hall was sealed off. No one else mentioned it. When I asked the supervisor, he said they'd had some electrical oddities overnight and were taking precautions. By the end of the week, the staff lunch roster was half empty. People called in sick, moved to other posts. Mara gave me a tight smile and said, "I've got a headache." She was gone the next day. One afternoon, I got a request to send dinner trays up to the North Tower. When I got there, the door was open a crack and the room was dark. I stepped in and set down the trays. As I turned to leave, the lights snapped on. 6 chairs sat around a metal table, empty. The trays were back on the counter exactly as I'd left them. The smell was thick, like hot iron. I heard a soft click behind me. The door swung shut on its own. For a moment, I stood there, listening to my own breathing. Then I backed out, tripping over the threshold. The door swung closed again and locked silently. I didn't see anyone else in the hallway. My radio crackled when I called for help. Just static. I pounded on the door until the supervisor's voice crackled through. "Give me a minute." The lock clicked and the door opened inward. I half expected someone to step out, but it was empty. No trays, no scorch marks, nothing unusual except the smell clinging to my clothes. Later that night, I stole a look at the daily logs. Every incident returned trays, handprints, odd power cycles, was logged under operator error. Nobody had reported the hallway marks or the locked door. I felt like I was losing my mind. The kitchen felt too big, the fluorescent lights too bright. Bramble, my dog, refused to come in when I got home, barking at the darkened windows even though there was no shape outside. I closed the blinds on all sides and left every light on. Sleep came in fits. I dreamt of walking through the cafeteria, rows of trays sliding off counters on their own, handprints glowing on every surface. When I woke, my apron was balled on the floor, wet with sweat. I called in sick the next morning and turned in my resignation before dawn. I left the base without looking back, pulling Bramble along the gravel road toward town. The cafeteria stayed behind me, pale and silent under the desert sky, and I knew the smells and the marks would linger long after I was gone. I was locking up the pumps just after midnight when the door to the little store swung open. Normally it'd be the wind, but that night it was a man dripping wet. Rain coming down hard out there, sheets bouncing off the pavement. I dropped the pump handle and jogged over. My dog, Java, a lanky border collie mix, shot out from behind the counter and bristled at the stranger. He leaned against the display of windshield wiper fluid, water streaming from his jacket. "My car stalled," he said, voice rough, "out past the hills near that old service road." He didn't give me a name, just stared at the ceiling with those wild eyes, shaking rain from his hair. I grabbed a towel and handed it over. Java nosed at his boots, whining. The man glanced down at the dog and managed a half smile. I poured him a coffee, black, no sugar. Steam curled up into the fluorescent light. He sipped, then said, "There was a light, floating over the desert. Glowing yellow-green, just hovered above the wash. My engine died as soon as I drove under it." He set the cup aside, condensation dripping down the sides. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. My phone died. I walked back here as fast as I could. Outside, the storm rattled the corrugated awning. I studied him. He looked real enough, mud on his jeans, cuts on his knuckles. I wanted to ask what he saw exactly, but he seemed done talking. I called the sheriff's office, but the line crackled. "Traffic's rough," the dispatcher said. "Call back in the morning." I watched the rain pool around the curb. Java kept nudging the man's leg. Finally, the guy said, "Thanks." He grabbed his cup and drifted back into the night without another word. That morning, the rain had stopped. The desert smelled like wet sage. I drove out the service road in my old pickup, Java curled in the passenger seat, ears back as we hit the dirt. The man mentioned tire tracks, so I looked for any ruts where asphalt gave way to sand. A mile out, I found them, deep grooves where 2 tires rolled off the road heading toward the wash. I parked and got out. The ground was soft from the rain. Every brush stem held droplets. I followed the tracks, Java padding quietly at my heels. They ended abruptly at the edge of a broad, shallow wash. No skid marks, no sign the driver turned around, just the tracks stopping as if the truck had vanished. I shone my flashlight along the wash bed. Nothing but smooth sand and small stones. A few lizard tracks, but no sign of a vehicle or person. Java sniffed the air, tail stiff. I felt a tug of unease. I stepped back toward the truck, noticing the horizon line where the ridges dipped. I thought I saw a flicker of movement just above the far hill, like a reflection off something curved. When I blinked, it was gone. I climbed back into the cab and drove toward town, but every time I glanced in the side mirror, the service road looked longer, like I'd never traveled it before. By the time I crested the last rise, the gas station sign was just a speck in the distance. At the pumps, Java jumped down and nosed at the tire tracks leading up to the island. They started there, as if he'd driven straight off the lot. I knelt, tracing them with my finger. They ended under the passenger door where Java sat. Inside, I found the coffee cup the man had used, still half full and lukewarm on the counter. I picked it up, testing the weight. Java circled behind me, low growl. I set the cup down, wiping its rim. The aroma was grassy and faintly sulfurous. I spent the next hour replaying the night in my head, rain, the stranger's soaked jacket, that glow he described. I thought about driving back out, but my legs felt like lead. That afternoon, I closed early and headed home, Java asleep against the seat. On the way, I passed the sheriff's deputy on patrol. I rolled down the window and asked about any missing person reports. He shrugged. "Desert folk come and go. he said, eyes on the road. No one's called it in. At home, I called my wife, Carrie, and told her I'd be late. Java perked up when I hit the driveway. The house smelled of dinner, curry and onions. Inside, I found Carrie in the kitchen. She handed me a bowl of rice and lentils. I ate, watching steam rise in the lamplight. Java lay at my feet, head on my boot. I looked out the window at the empty road winding toward the hills. No lights, no shadows, just the hush of the desert night settling in. Later, I pored over local maps, marking the service road and the wash. I looked for any other mention of strange lights or sudden engine failures. Nothing concrete, just rumors of ghost trucks and desert mirages. When I finally climbed into bed, Java jumped up beside me, tail thumping. I turned off the lamp and stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the man's eyes, wide, frantic, and the way the tracks just stopped in the sand. I didn't dream that night, but I woke twice to Java's soft whimper. Each time I glanced at the window, thinking I saw a pale glow drifting across the yard, but it was just the streetlight shifting behind the curtains. In the morning, I found a single footprint in the gravel by the gate, boot tread, mud still clinging. I stared at it, then checked Carrie's boots by the door, clean. I stepped in the print. It was cool and damp, as if fresh. There was no rain overnight. I left it there. Java and I walked the front yard, circling that print like detectives. It pointed toward the desert again, toward the hills where my pickup had stalled. I went inside, washed up, and poured more coffee. The cup trembled in my hand, and I renamed the service road on the map, the vanishing track. I didn't know why or how that man faded back into the night, but he left marks on the road, on the map, on my mind. And I kept thinking that somewhere out there, in the place where tires meet soft sand and engines die, a light was still hovering, just beyond the hills. I was half aware of how late it was when Will tapped my shoulder and pointed ahead. We'd been driving the two-lane that skirts Groom Lake, windows down against the desert heat, and our old Subaru Outback had started coughing on the last stretch. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. I glanced up just as the headlights flickered, dimming until I could barely see the yellow line. I eased off the gas. "You see that?" Will asked. His voice sounded distant, like I was underwater. The headlights brightened again, then went nearly dark a second later. The engine stalled, the gauges dropping to 0. I flexed my fingers on the steering wheel. "Try the radio," I said. He twisted the dial, nothing but static, no voice at all. We'd been listening to old blues stations, but now even that was gone. The dial felt gummy, unresponsive. Out here, there shouldn't have been any dead zones. Will opened the window and yelled, but the desert swallowed his words. I glanced at the passenger seat. Our dog, Ledger, a lanky Whippet Greyhound mix, lay curled in his bed, ears flicking. He looked up with wide eyes, head tilting like he heard something I didn't. I didn't know what he was hearing. I clicked the headlights off and let my eyes adjust. Above the road, maybe 50 yards ahead, a glow appeared. Soft, white-green, like bioluminescent algae in a creek, but steady, unblinking. It hovered 20 feet above the asphalt, suspended as if by wires, but nothing held it. I swallowed, my throat dry. "That thing," Will voiced trembling. The glow pulsed once, then brightened until it cast long shadows under the car. Ledger stood, hackles raised, and let out a low whine. I unbuckled, stood in the open driver's door. The orb dipped slightly, as though it noticed me. I could feel a vibration in the air, just under the skin. It wasn't sound I heard. It was pressure, a deep thrumming that made my teeth buzz. I crouched to Ledger's level. He trembled, eyes fixed on the orb. I patted his head, but his fur prickled under my hand. Behind me, Will's phone flashlight shook in his grip, painting dust motes in the light beam. The orb drifted closer, gliding without wind or ripple. We stayed still, like animals caught in headlights. I thought about slamming the door, speeding away, but my legs wouldn't move. The orb halted a few feet beyond the grill, bright enough to blind me if I stared. Then it moved, slow, sideways, matching the curve of the road. Will gunned the engine. It roared to life, rattling the doors. I threw the car into drive, tires spinning on the gravel shoulder. The headlights flared back to full, no flicker this time, and we pulled onto the pavement. The orb stayed beside us, gliding over the desert scrub. Our speed 2-lane pace, maybe 40 miles per hour. It never got closer than 10 feet to the car, never drifted away further, just moved alongside. Will kept one hand on the wheel, the other on the gear shift, eyes wide. Ledger pressed flat against the seat. The radio would flicker to life for a second, some distant AM talk show, then die again, static taking over. Ahead, the mesa walls rose, framing the highway. The orb passed beneath the rocky outcrop and curved with us. The air smelled faintly of ozone and dust, like after a thunderstorm, but no rain had fallen in weeks. I reached for my phone and held it out the window. The orb's glow washed over the screen. I tapped record, but the display went black. In that moment, I saw the orb's underside. Smooth, seamless, no panels or seams. It tilted slightly, reflecting faint starlight. We drove for a solid 5 miles, the highway winding past scrub and bluffs. The orb never spoke, never flashed any message. Its light remained calm, pulsing once every second like a slow metronome. Then on a straightaway, it rose. Not fast, no streak or roar, but slow, deliberate. We watched as it climbed above the mesa rim until only a pale dot remained against the star field. Then, without a sound, it shot straight up, fading into nothing. The night returned to normal, headlights illuminating empty desert. The car fell silent, engine droned, radio dead, radio dial stuck. I flicked the overhead light on and off. It blinked once, then stayed dark. We coasted to a stop just past a cattle guard, the bars clinking under our tires. Will killed the engine. I unclenched my fingers from the wheel. Ledger hopped down from the seat, shaking like he just run a marathon. I opened the door. The desert was still. Not a breeze stirred. The moon hovered above the mesa, a waning sliver, and the highway stretched empty in both directions. We got back in and clicked off the headlights. Will coaxed Ledger onto the back seat. I slipped the car into gear, pulled onto the road, and drove away without a word. Nearly home, near the lights of Rachel, the car ran fine again. Radio came on, headlights worked, everything normal. But I could swear Ledger refused to look in the rearview mirror. And every so often, when I drive that stretch now, I glance up, half expecting a pale glow drifting next to me, moving in silence through the desert night. We were a half-mile up the old mining trail when my phone chirped. Device alert. GPS signal lost. I glanced at the others. Mia swore under her breath and tapped her wrist unit. Zach yanked out his tablet. All 3 screens blinked, no signal, before switching to a map that showed our route cutting straight through the fenced-off Area 51 boundary. I shrugged, thinking it was just the canyon walls messing with reception. The sun was dipping behind the peaks, painting the sky orange and purple. Our dog, Bramble, a lean border collie mix, trotted ahead, nose to the ground. She paused at every rock and shrub, eager for the next scent. We pressed on, joking about sneaking into the base by accident. The trail narrowed at a hairpin turn where a lone juniper clung to the cliffside. The wind had picked up, rattling dead branches overhead. I flipped my phone over. Still no GPS, just that impossible line cutting across the desert core. "That's weird," Zach said, zooming in. The map route was a straight white line, like someone had drawn it freehand. No trail, no roads, just a vector pointing deeper into the base. Mia tapped her fingers on her hiking pole. "Battery's full. It shouldn't do that." We shrugged and shrugged again, more uneasy than we let on. We'd hiked harder terrain without a signal. But something about cutting into that forbidden zone felt different. By the time we reached a ledge overlooking the salt flats, twilight had settled. The moon was a bright sliver rising behind the mesa. We spread out our packs on a flat rock and passed around water and granola bars. Bramble nosed our leftovers, tail wagging. I checked my watch, 8:37 p.m. The GPS apps flickered again, and all 3 devices shifted to a screen labeled Alternate Route. The white line now cut diagonally across that same fenced-off patch. Mia shivered. She'd gone off her meds for the trip. I knew anxious meant doubly so. Then we felt it, a deep vibration under our feet, like a truck idling a mile away, only stronger, lower, almost rolling us from side to side. I looked at Zach. His knuckles were white on the tablet. "Did you feel that?" I whispered. He nodded. "Yeah, but there's no road out there." Bramble dropped from the ledge and backed up, hackles raised, low whine catching in her throat. The vibration stopped as suddenly as it began, and the desert went silent. A breeze stirred when Zach stood. "Let's head back." We gathered our gear and turned to retrace the trail, flashlights sweeping the path. I felt oddly lightheaded, like someone had taken a breath out of my lungs. Bramble padded close to my side. Halfway down, the moon broke through a thin cloud layer, casting pale light onto the scrub. I saw it then, just a flicker, like a shadow shifting at the tree line, maybe 30 yards off the trail. A silhouette so vague it could have been a trick of moonlight. But 2 points glowed green, eyes low to the ground, unblinking. I froze. My mouth went dry. Mia caught my arm. Jake? Before I could answer, the silhouette snapped backward into the darkness. My flashlight beam swung to where it stood. Empty desert. Just a cluster of sagebrush swaying in the breeze. My phone buzzed again. All 3 of our devices lit up with the normal trail map. But it no longer showed the fence line or the base boundary. It was as if the restricted zone had never existed. Zach puffed out his breath. This is nuts. We moved quickly, but not recklessly, flashlights carving arcs through the gloom. Every few steps I thought I heard something scuff behind me, a toe dragging in sand, a soft brush of stone. I'd spin and Bramble would bark once, then go silent, tail low. At the switchback, we found footprints, slight depressions in the dirt, too big for our boots, no deeper than animal tracks, no claw marks, no dirt piled at the toe. Just oval shapes pointing up the mountain, ending abruptly at the lip of the switchback. Mia knelt to inspect them. They disappear at the edge. I knelt beside her, shining my light into the wash below. Nothing but tumbleweeds and ancient mortar stone where miners once blasted veins of silver. I looked back to the trail crest. The footprints didn't lead there. Instead, they pointed at the darkness behind us. Mia swallowed. Okay, let's go. We picked up the pace. My boots crunched on loose rock. Bramble ran ahead at times, then paused, head tilted, ears twitching. I kept my voice low and steady. We're almost there. It was another mile before we crested the final ridge and saw the wash road leading to our cars. The moonlight lit the asphalt like a ribbon. We relaxed, just a little. Then my phone buzzed one more time. I checked it and frowned. The map now had 2 routes back, the wash road and a narrow white line heading off into the desert, pointed right at the base gate. Are you kidding me? I said. I threw the phone onto the ground. It spun screen side down in the dirt. We didn't stop to look. Bramble raced ahead, barking once when she reached the cars. I fumbled with my keys, hand shaking. The ignition turned, engine sputtered, then roared to life. We drove off the wash, tires crunching gravel, light beams scanning the desert. I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. Darkness, empty roadway, nothing to see but dust rising behind our taillights. Back at home, I downloaded the trail data. All 3 GPS tracks had clean paths following the official trail. No glitches, no phantom lines, no impossible shortcuts. Just one bump in elevation every half mile. When I went to delete the event from my log, I saw one more track entry, time stamped at 8:45 p.m., and coordinates deep inside the base perimeter at the exact spot where the glowing eyes had flickered. I highlighted the row and pressed delete. My computer beeped, then shut down. My phone died, and from my window I heard a low hum, distant and steady like sand shifting beneath steel, just for a moment before the night swallowed it again. I was alone in the radar bunker when the first one appeared. I was midway through the graveyard shift, 3 a.m., the desert outside cold and still, and my only company was my German shepherd, Hoshi, curled under the console. She'd come in with me that night, restless after I'd tried to put her out in the kennel again. I left a chair tilted back so she could slide under it and doze. The screen flickered once, then showed it. A perfect circle, glowing soft gray against the black background. Too round to be a storm cell or a flock of birds. It zipped in from the south edge, paused for exactly 2 seconds, then shot off to the east at a speed that would shred any known aircraft wiring. I leaned forward, squinting. The blip was small, 3 pixels in diameter, but unmistakable. I keyed the mic. Control, we've got an unidentified blip, circle, moving hypersonic. A crackle, then silence. My radio was dead. I toggled panels. No interference lights, no alarms. Everything looked normal. I called out, Hoshi, you seeing this? She lifted her head, ears forward, then lay back down. I tapped the track history. The pulse return was clean, a perfect echo. No trail, no debris field, nothing. I tried to plot a course. Data lines went dead. The blip vanished from the screen. A second later, it popped up on the west edge, same pattern. For the next hour, I tracked 6 more, all identical circles, all darting in, pausing, then racing off. No altitude data, no radar signature except that single dot. My heartbeat sank low, heavy in my chest. At 4 a.m., the supervisor's voice came over the intercom, flat, clipped. Tech Larkin, step into my office. Now. I closed the feed and stepped down the corridor, Hoshi padding at my heels. The hall lights were dimmed for energy savings, though we'd never had a blackout. I heard echoes of my footsteps and Hoshi's nails on the metal grate. His office door was ajar. Inside, Colonel Reeves sat behind his desk, hands steepled. No one else in the room. He looked me straight in the eye. Report only what the instruments show, he said. Never trust what your eyes tell you. Understand? My mouth went dry. Sir. Sir, the instruments showed exactly what I said. He leaned forward. When the instruments fail to show something, do not mention it. Understood? I nodded. Yes, sir. He tapped a folder. Log it as false returns. End of conversation. Back at the console, I hesitated, then punched a false returns code. Hoshi whined, and I scratched her head. Over the next few weeks, weird stuff kept happening. The circle blips returned, sometimes at 2, sometimes at 5 a.m. I logged them all under false returns. My co-techs looked at me funny, murmurs of ghost radar floated around, but no one asked details. One night, Hoshi wouldn't settle. She paced, ears up, low growl in her throat. I backed up from the console. The bunker's hum sounded hollow, like a drum with the bottom out. The screen flickered and a circle appeared yet again, but this time it didn't leave. It hovered at the center of the display for almost 5 minutes, silent, unblinking. I reached to key the mic. The radio clicked to life. I heard static, then a synthetic voice. Object confirmed. The echo made Hoshi stiffen, hackles raised. I jumped, but the screen went dark before I could say anything. I slammed keys. All the panels powered down. The emergency lights kicked in, bathing the bunker in red. Hoshi barked once, sharp. My own voice sounded strange as I whispered, "What the hell?" By the time the tech crew arrived, 15 minutes later, all systems were back online. The logs had no anomalies, no power glitches. Every console reading was normal. The circle never appeared in the record. They found me hunched under the console, Hoshi's nose nudging my hand. The crew chief asked if I was okay. I forced a laugh. Just a power hiccup. He frowned but waved me off. Get some sleep, Larkin. That day, I went home early. Hoshi slept at my feet while I stared out the living room window at the desert. The sun was bright. Too bright. I waited for shadows to move. The next shift, I caught it again. One perfect circle, higher speed, further path. I felt sick. Hoshi wouldn't come into the bunker. She pressed against the door, whining. When Colonel Reeves called me in again, I knew the drill. He told me to classify it as static. He said his own eyes had seen planes in the air that didn't exist on radar, and he reported them as aircraft. You're not aircraft tech, he said, so mark it down. I walked back to my station, mind numb. Hoshi followed this time, wary. I logged the circle as static. On my way home, I drove slowly down the highway that cuts past the base perimeter. The wind rattled my open window. I glanced at the mesas, empty sky, no circles in daylight. That night, at home, I set my alarm for 2 a.m. Hoshi stirred beside me when it rang. I got up and looked out the window again. Stars, bright, no movement. I went back to bed. Hoshi curled up against my leg. The next day, the log showed 3 more circles. Perfect rounds, silent returns darting in and out. I traced them on a printout. Each started near that far mesa, paused near our bunker's location, then raced away. My hands shook as I filled out the report. Hoshi paced in the living room, glancing at the window like she expected something to appear. I handed it in. Now I watch the skies more than the screen. I wonder if those circles are out there right now, tracing invisible paths, waiting to show themselves once more. Hoshi sits by the door, ears up, ready to warn me when they choose to return. I was finishing up another round of checks in the East Maintenance Bay. Just me, my flashlight, and the steady rumble of the HVAC ducts, when the hum cut out. The whole room went silent, like someone hit a mute button. It was around 1:15 a.m., and the chill hit me first. Not a blast from the freezer down the hall, but a creeping cold that slid under my collar and made my palms sweat. I flicked on the overhead lights. They buzzed for a second, then glowed normally. I shook my head, thinking a breaker had tripped. My dog, Pippa, a skinny Australian cattle dog mix I'd smuggled in when no one was looking, lifted her head from her bed by the door and growled low. She'd been with me every night shift for months, but this was the first time she'd sounded warning. I crouched by the console and checked the gauges. Pressure levels, coolant temps, airflow rates, all normal. Yet the silence remained. I tapped the mic on my shoulder. Central? Nothing. Just static in my ear. Behind me, Pippa stood and padded to the window overlooking the yard. I followed her line of sight. The floodlights beyond the chain-link fence looked normal, but up close they cast sharper shadows, edges too crisp. The wind had stopped. Even the desert grasses out there were perfectly still. I stepped toward the window, heartbeats slowing a little as I stared into the empty lot. Then something moved. It came from the far side of the bay, outside the window. An angular shape slipped past, no more than shoulder height, but its edges were jagged, too precise to be a person. It cut through the light so smoothly that it bent the beam, leaving a sliver of shadow that curved around the corner. I blinked, and it was gone. Pippa barked once and bolted to my side, tail stiff. I backed away from the glass, fumbling for my phone, but it didn't turn on. The screen stayed black. I grabbed my walkie, tapped for help. Maintenance here. Systems silent, cold air, and something just moved outside. I held my breath. Seconds passed. Then static. No response. I swallowed, turning on my flashlight and checking the door. It was locked from the inside as usual. I pulled my jacket tighter and edged toward the exit. Pippa followed, whining softly. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights flickered on and off, 3 times, then steady. I closed my eyes against the strobe, counting to 10. When I opened them, the bay's walls were lined with maintenance schedules and safety posters, all intact. But everything felt wrong. I looked down at Pippa. She trembled, hackles up. I knelt to scratch her ears. "Let's get out of here," I whispered. We moved slowly down the corridor toward the main stairwell. Halfway there, I stopped at the door to the server room. Normally I'd hear the constant whine of fans, but now it was quiet. Dead quiet. I cracked the door. Inside, the red on and a fat lights blinked off the racks. The emergency LEDs bathed the racks in dull orange. I could see my reflection in the black glass of the cabinets, eyes wide, hair plastered to my scalp with sweat. Then the door behind me clicked shut. I spun around. No wind, no breeze, just the soft thunk of metal. I yanked on the handle. It didn't budge. "Pippa," I said, voice low. She skidded toward the door and scratched at it. I tried to kick it open, but my foot hit solid steel. I fumbled for my phone again. Dead. My walkie still crackled. I pressed the button and spat, "Anyone." The static flared into a high-pitched whistle, then cut out completely. I let my forehead rest against the cool metal. Pippa barked, low at first, then frantic. I took a deep breath and tested the door again. This time, it opened with a quiet click, as if someone had unlocked it from the other side. We stepped out into the hall. I slammed the door behind us. The lights were steady again. Pippa licked my hand, her nose warm against my knuckles. I didn't ask her what she saw. Down the stairs, I checked my watch. 1:27 a.m., 12 minutes since the hum died. My phone buzzed on the stairwell landing. 2 missed calls from my girlfriend, Sophia. It rang again. I answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" Sophia asked. "Yeah," I said, rubbing my neck. "Just trouble with the power." "You sound weird." She paused. "You sure you're alone?" "I'm fine," I said. Louder than I meant, she sighed. "All right, come home safe." The line went dead. I carried Pippa the rest of the way, steps clicking behind me. In the main lobby, security cameras dotted the walls. I reflexively checked the monitors above the desk. All feeds active, showing empty halls, the bay doors closed tight. I reached the exit and swiped my badge. Nothing. The door stayed locked. I swiped faster, harder. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement on one screen, a dark shape darting past the bay window. I punched the release button. The door clicked open. Pippa hurried out before me, nose to the ground. I followed, breathing relief in the cool night air. Outside, the moon was hidden behind clouds, the desert silent. The bay doors loomed, shut against the yard. I walked the perimeter fence, looking for footprints or signs. Nothing. Back at my truck, I loaded Pippa into the passenger seat, then sat inside with the door open. I stared at the base entrance, floodlights cutting through the night until they hit the clouds, then everything faded to gray. Pippa licked my cheek. I scratched behind her ear. The engine roared to life. I drove away without looking back, headlights dancing across the empty highway. That night at home, I lay awake listening for the hum. Pippa slept at the foot of the bed, twitching in her dreams. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the shape slipping past the window. Shapeless, angular, bending the light. And I wondered if I'd hear that humming again, if I'd ever walk into that bay and feel the air vibrate under my skin. I woke to a dull thump against the side of the tent. My watch said 2:13 a.m., but I swore it felt later. I unzipped the flap and stepped onto the coarse sand. Ranger, my skinny border collie mix, was at the edge of our camp, nose quivering at a rock face about 30 yards off. He let out a single sharp bark. I slung on my headlamp and followed him. The desert was cold, the air holding that dry chill you only get out here past Groom Lake. Ranger pawed a boulder and looked up at me. I pointed the beam at the rocks. There it was. A soft glow pulsing in time with my pulse, or at least what felt like my pulse. I crouched low. The light was pale blue, reflecting off the striations in the stone, fading, then brightening again. I stood and moved closer, heart thumping. The pulses were steady, slow, rhythmic. I tapped my chest. It matched. I lifted my camera, hit record, but the lens showed static. I shook it. The display blinked, then went dark. I cursed and kept watching. After 5 blinks, the glow vanished. The rocks went dark. Ranger whined and nosed my boot. I checked my watch, 4:47 a.m., 2 hours and 34 minutes lost. My head spun. I shook Ranger's collar. "You feel that?" I whispered. His ears perked and he circled me, restless. I tried to piece it together. I remember falling asleep around midnight after dinner. No wind, just quiet. Then waking here, disoriented. I glanced back at the tent. My camp stove was still warm, a wisp of flame ghosting the grill. My water bottle was half filled, just like I left it. I dashed inside, fumbled for my camera's memory card, and popped it out. The card reader on my laptop showed empty folders, no files from tonight. I muttered under my breath and zipped the tent back up. Ranger settled inside, ears flat, eyes on me. I sat on the ground under the flap, shivering. My heart felt too big for my chest. I tried to recall any odd sounds. Aside from Ranger's bark, I hadn't heard vehicles or planes, nothing but a distant hum I chalked up to generators at the base. But now I wasn't sure. Sunrise crept over the mesa rim. The first light revealed fresh footprints in the sand around my tent, mine and Ranger's, but also another set, larger and deeper, leading toward the restricted fence. I followed them a few yards. The prints ended abruptly at the barbed wire. No gate, no break. A wind gust stirred the tumbleweeds. I watched them roll past, pieces of trash swirling in their wake. I packed up fast, hands shaking, and loaded everything onto my pack frame. Ranger hopped onto my shoulders to get a better view. At my truck, the dash clock blinked, as if it had lost power. I flicked the headlights on and off, wired fine. I climbed in, jammed the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. On the drive back along Desert Highway, I kept glancing out the rearview mirror. The fence of the base looked the same. Towers spaced at regular intervals, floodlights off now in daylight. No convoy of trucks, no sign of activity. I stopped at the first gas station in Rachel, legs trembling. Ranger hopped down and nosed the glass door. Inside, the clerk gave me a curious look when I asked to fill my tank. "Early start," she said. I nodded, voice tight. Over coffee, I thumbed through the camera's menu. It showed battery at 70%, no recordings. The date and time were correct, only the footage was gone. I replayed the still images from yesterday evening. Campfire, my dinner plate, Ranger drinking water. No sign of any pulsing glow. I headed back home, desert rolling past, mountains on the horizon. I tried to sleep that night, though, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw pale light flickering against my eyelids, counting out minutes I'd never lived. In the morning, Ranger tugged me awake with a whine. I followed him to the window. At dawn, the mesa looked unchanged. The desert breathed in soft waves of heat. But I felt like I'd walked through a door I couldn't find again. I left my camera on the desk, lens cap snapped on. Ranger lay by the door, ears twitching whenever the wind rattled the screens. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I'd blink and miss it again. Those pulses, the erased hours, the footprints that walked themselves to the edge of the base and back. I was 10 minutes into my dusk patrol run, just me, the old Cessna 172, and the faint engine drone, when the ATC crackled, dead silent. I keyed the mic on the tower frequency at Indian Springs, but all I got was static hiss. I glanced at the GPS backup. Signal lost. Then the radar scope on my dash flashed a new blip, one I hadn't filed on flight plan. The transponder lit up 8820 Alpha, an unassigned code. I tapped the identify button. Nothing. Its speed read 2100 knots. I lifted in my seat. No jet engine roar, no sonic boom, nothing but my own prop wash. And it was headed right toward Groom Lake at 25,000 feet. No climb or descent, just a dead steady vector. I called the tower on guard channel. Silence. No response. My stomach nodded. I flicked on the landing light, pointed the plane south to fly around the base. If the thing was real, and not some inverted glitch, I wanted eyes on it. Below me, the desert was stained pink by the sinking sun. The messes stood like silent sentinels. My oil temp climbed a few degrees, nothing serious, but odd with only a 20-minute flight. I angled the plane over the dry lake bed, scanning the sky. No contrails, no blinking nav lights, just the contrail clean air. The blip on the scope kept pace off my left wingtip. It must have been 50 miles away, but kept perfect formation. My heart pounded. I flicked the comm switch again. A voice finally crackled out, an officer from the base, voice clipped. "You're not cleared to identify that target. Maintain heading and altitude. Do not deviate." "Copy that," I said, but my fingers tingled on the yoke. I leveled off at 5,000 feet, fighting the urge to bank. Below me, the white salt flats glowed. The sun had dipped, and the horizon flared orange. The ghost plane on the scope flickered and vanished. Just like that. No warning, no glitch beep. At one moment it was there, the next my radar was blank, except for the usual weather returns, of which there were none. I slowed, cockpit lights low, and peered out. The sky was empty. No shape, no silhouette, no contrail. I reached for the mic. "Base. Do you read?" Static again. I turned back toward Indian Springs. Nearly home, I thought. As I descended below 10,000, a row of military trucks rolled out across the desert road far below. They sealed off a stretch of highway and laid down spikes. No symbols, no markings, just black tarp-covered cargo. I circled low, 200 feet, keeping a tight turn over the highway. I watched men in dark uniforms unload crates into shallow trenches. Searchlights cut through the desert dust, but never flicked upward. I felt the plane shudder. My engine sputtered briefly, as if the air itself had changed. Then the power leveled off. I jetted back up to pattern altitude, 6,000. The trucks were brown dots growing small in my wing mirror. I tried the radio again. Now I got a voice low and urgent. "Clear the frequency." Then nothing. I followed the road back to the airfield, blood pumping. The runway lights were on full. I landed, taxied to a secluded hangar. Heart thumping, I asked the mechanic what was up with the highway barricade. He shook his head. "Base ops won't say," he muttered. "Just that it's sealed for scheduled shoring." I climbed out, the desert breeze cool against my skin. My shadow stretched across the tarmac. I peered toward the north, toward Groom Lake. No lights, no shape, nothing out of place except the memory of that blip. At home that night, I brewed coffee on the patio with my dog, Huckleberry, a big yellow lab who snores like a tractor. He nosed at my boot as I stared at the sky. The stars were pinpricks, unchanged. No strange lights, no hum in the air. I checked my flight log. No errors, no notes about ghost targets permitted, just time, altitude, fuel used. The radar recording was blank, wiped clean. I let Huckleberry inside and locked the door. My radio scanner still hissed static on every channel. I poured a final cup of coffee, stepped out on the porch. The desert was silent, empty. I went to bed, listening for the hum that never returned, wondering if I'd see that unmarked blip again.